The sea keeps its secrets like no other force on Earth. Across centuries of human exploration, countless vessels have sailed into the horizon carrying dreams, cargo, and souls who believed the ocean could be conquered through steel, steam, and human determination. Some returned with stories of adventure and profit. Others never returned at all, vanishing so completely that only their names remain floating on the surface of maritime records, like messages in bottles that no one can decode. These are not tales of heroic last stands or dramatic battles against impossible odds. Instead, ships simply ceased to exist, crews that abandoned perfectly seaworthy vessels for reasons no living person can explain. Tonight we're following true accounts, documented disappearances, and investigations that raised more questions than they answered. So, settle in, let your mind drift, and whisper in the comments. Where are you now, and what time glows back at you? Each story represents real people who sailed into mystery, leaving behind only speculation and the haunting possibility that some secrets are meant to remain forever beyond our reach. A half-eaten breakfast sat cooling on the galley table, steam no longer rising from the coffee cup beside it. On December 5, 1872, the British brigantine Dei Gratia encountered something that defied every maritime tradition, a perfectly seaworthy vessel sailing itself across the Atlantic. Her sails hung in tatters, yes, but her hull remained sound. Her cargo sat secure in the hold. Personal belongings lay neatly arranged in the crew quarters. Only one thing was missing from this otherwise ordinary merchant ship: every living soul who should have been aboard. The ship bore the name Mary Celeste painted across her stern, though she had not always carried that identity. Built in 1861 as the Amazon, this 103-foot brigantine had earned whispers of misfortune from her very first voyage. Her maiden captain died before reaching port. She ran aground in her early years, collided with fishing vessels, even caught fire while anchored safely in harbour. Sailors spoke of cursed timber and unlucky stars, but ship owners saw only a sturdy hull that could carry cargo profitably across the ocean. By 1872, rechristened and under new management, the vessel had found steadier fortune. Captain Benjamin Briggs commanded her, a man whose reputation for seamanship exceeded that of most mariners twice his age. His crew numbered 7 experienced sailors, men who knew the Atlantic's moods and could read weather in the color of distant clouds. Traveling with them were Briggs' wife Sarah and their daughter Sophia, barely 2 years old. It was not uncommon for captains to bring family on longer voyages, and the Mary Celeste offered comfortable quarters for the captain's loved ones. The cargo manifest listed 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, bound for the distilleries of Genoa. Raw alcohol commanded good prices in European markets, and the voyage promised profits that would secure the Briggs family through the coming winter. Nothing in the ship's preparation suggested anything other than routine commerce. Supplies loaded, weather charts consulted, farewells exchanged, with the usual mixture of melancholy and anticipation that marked all departures. November 7th dawned clear as the Mary Celeste cleared New York Harbor, her destination some 4,000 miles distant, across waters that had carried thousands of ships safely to European ports. Briggs had sailed this route before. His crew knew their duties. The alcohol sat properly secured in the hold, its fumes contained by tight barrel staves and proper ventilation. Captain David Morehouse of the Dei Gratia would later testify that he spotted the Mary Celeste around noon, roughly 400 miles east of Portugal. Something about her movement struck him as wrong. She sailed erratically, as if no hand guided her wheel. Her sails caught wind poorly, suggesting neglect rather than purposeful navigation. Morehouse knew Briggs personally, had shared drinks with him in New York taverns. The sight of his friend's ship behaving so strangely compelled investigation. The boarding party found a vessel frozen in time. Charts lay spread across the navigation table, with pencil marks showing the ship's intended course. The captain's cabin contained personal letters, partially written but never finished. Sarah Briggs's sewing sat abandoned mid-stitch, her needle still threaded. Most unnervingly, that morning's breakfast remained on the table: bread, coffee, and preserved meat arranged as if the diners had simply stepped away for a moment. 9 barrels of alcohol had been opened in the hold, their contents evaporated or spilled. The ship's lifeboat was missing, along with the ship's papers and navigation instruments. Yet no signs of violence marked any surface. No blood stained the decks. No bullet holes pierced the planking. Whatever had driven 10 people to abandon a perfectly functional ship had done so without leaving evidence of struggle or panic. The logbook's final entry, dated November 25th, recorded nothing unusual. At 5 a.m. made the island of St. Mary's bearing SSW, distant 6 miles. Standard navigation notes written in Briggs' careful hand. 10 days had passed between that entry and the ship's discovery, 10 days during which the Mary Celeste had sailed herself across hundreds of miles of open ocean. Investigators who examined the vessel in Gibraltar proposed several explanations. The alcohol cargo suggested one possibility: fumes escaping from damaged barrels might have created explosion fears, driving the crew to abandon ship temporarily. But experienced sailors would recognize the difference between dangerous concentrations and minor leakage. Briggs had transported similar cargoes before, without incident. Weather records showed no major storms in the area during the relevant time frame. The Mary Celeste showed no damage consistent with severe seas or lightning strikes. Her rigging remained largely intact, suggesting she had not battled through any significant tempest. The mystery deepened when marine surveyors found the hull sound below the waterline. Whatever had happened, it involved no collision with reef or iceberg. Some maritime experts suggested waterspouts, those twisting columns of water that could appear suddenly and create tremendous pressure changes. A waterspout might temporarily flood the deck, convincing the crew their ship was foundering, but such phenomena typically last only minutes, and prudent sailors would have observed their vessel's continued seaworthiness before permanently abandoning her. The missing lifeboat indicated deliberate departure, not sudden catastrophe. Someone had taken time to lower the boat properly and load it with navigation instruments. Yet lifeboats in 1872 offered poor prospects for survival in Atlantic waters, especially with winter approaching. Experienced mariners like Briggs would know this. What could have seemed worse than remaining aboard a sound ship? More disturbing theories emerged as the case gained international attention. Some suggested piracy, though nothing valuable had been taken. Others proposed mutiny, though Briggs was known for fair treatment of his crews. A few investigators wondered about insurance fraud, but the Mary Celeste's owners showed genuine surprise at her abandoned condition. Each explanation crumbled under examination, leaving only deeper questions. The fate of the 10 missing people remains unknown. No bodies ever washed ashore. No wreckage of their lifeboat was ever identified. They vanished as completely as if the ocean had opened beneath them and closed again, leaving no trace of their passage. Gibraltar authorities eventually released the Mary Celeste to her owners, who sold her at a loss. She continued sailing under various flags and captains, but her reputation followed her. Sailors spoke of strange noises in her hold, of compasses that spun without reason when aboard her. Her final captain, desperate to escape mounting debts and the ship's unlucky reputation, deliberately wrecked her in Haitian waters in 1885. Even then, the insurance company suspected fraud. The Mary Celeste seemed determined to cause trouble until the very end. Modern investigators have applied new technologies to the old mystery. Computer models of wind and current patterns suggest the ship could indeed have sailed hundreds of miles without human guidance. Chemical analysis of alcohol residues supports theories about dangerous fumes. Yet no evidence definitively explains why 10 people would choose certain death in a small boat over uncertain danger aboard a seaworthy ship. The Mary Celeste endures because she represents something fundamental about human fear, the terror of finding familiar things abandoned for no discernible reason. She sailed into history not because she sank dramatically or burned spectacularly, but because she continued sailing when she should have stopped. In a world where ships were lost regularly to storm and reef, she achieved immortality by being found. Somewhere in the Atlantic depths, her timbers now rest scattered across the seafloor. But her mystery remains afloat, drifting through maritime lore like a ghost ship that refuses to sink. She reminds us that the ocean holds secrets we may never fathom, and that sometimes the most unsettling discoveries are those that appear normal until we look closer and realize something essential is missing. The half-eaten breakfast has long since crumbled to dust. The unfinished letters have dissolved in salt water. But the questions remain, floating on the surface of our understanding like debris from a wreck we cannot locate. Evidence of a mystery that the sea has chosen to keep for itself. Sometimes the ocean doesn't just claim its victims, it erases them completely, as if they never existed at all. In the archives of the US Navy, there exists a file that defies every principle of modern maritime investigation. No wreckage coordinates, no survivor testimonies, no final radio transmission, just a single haunting entry: USS Cyclops, vanished without trace, March 1918. What makes this disappearance so unsettling isn't just the loss of 306 souls, but the absolute silence that followed. Ships don't simply cease to exist, yet somehow the Cyclops did exactly that. The vessel itself was no ordinary cargo ship. Built in 1910, the USS Cyclops stretched over 540 feet, a steel behemoth designed to carry the lifeblood of naval warfare: coal, ore, and the raw materials that kept America's fleet moving. Her reinforced hull could bear nearly 20,000 tons, and her twin engines had powered her safely across the Atlantic dozens of times. She was, by every measure, unsinkable under normal circumstances. But February 1918 brought circumstances that were anything but normal. The Cyclops had loaded her holds with over 10,000 tons of manganese ore in Brazil, a mineral essential for steel production, critically needed for the war effort. Her captain, George Worley, was an experienced mariner who had navigated these waters countless times before. The route to Baltimore was well established, the weather forecast clear. On March 4th, the ship made her scheduled stop in Barbados, where port officials noted nothing unusual. The crew seemed in good spirits, the cargo secure, the engines running smoothly. 3 days later, the Cyclops radioed her position and estimated arrival time. Then she simply vanished from the face of the earth. What followed was one of the most extensive search operations in naval history. Ships combed every mile of the intended route. Aircraft scanned the horizon for oil slicks, debris, anything that might indicate where the massive vessel had gone down. Coastal stations from Florida to Nova Scotia were alerted to watch for wreckage washing ashore. Yet after weeks of searching, the ocean yielded nothing. Not a single life preserver, not one piece of floating cargo, not even the smallest fragment of the ship that had carried over 300 men into oblivion. The silence was deafening. In an age when maritime disasters typically left some trace, survivors clinging to wreckage, distress signals crackling across the airwaves, bodies washing up on distant shores, the Cyclops had apparently disintegrated into nothing. It was as if the ship had sailed into a void and simply stopped existing. Naval investigators proposed the logical explanations first. The Cyclops had been experiencing engine trouble, reportedly running on only one of her twin power plants. A ship carrying such massive weight would be vulnerable if caught in a sudden storm. Perhaps her structural beam, the single steel spine that ran the length of her hull, had finally succumbed to the stress, snapping the vessel in two and sending her to the bottom before anyone could react. But this theory, however plausible, couldn't explain the complete absence of debris. When ships break apart at sea, they leave evidence. Wooden crates float. Metal fragments sink slowly. Lifeboats are designed to break free automatically. Yet the Cyclops left nothing at all, as if she had been carefully disassembled piece by piece and removed from existence. The wartime context added darker possibilities to the mystery. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic and sabotage was a constant concern. Some whispered that enemy agents had infiltrated the crew, that the manganese ore, so vital to American steel production, had made the Cyclops a target worth destroying completely. Others spoke of internal betrayal, of crew members who might have scuttled their own ship for reasons known only to themselves. Yet even these theories struggled against the facts. Submarine attacks typically left survivors, witnesses, some record of the encounter. Sabotage required planning, explosives, methods that would still leave traces floating on the surface. The Cyclops hadn't been attacked, she had simply ceased to be. The ocean itself offered its own explanations. Scientists would later document the existence of rogue waves, walls of water over 100 feet high that could appear without warning, crushing ships instantly beneath their weight. The Cyclops, already struggling with mechanical issues and riding low under her heavy cargo, would have been helpless against such a force. But even rogue waves leave wreckage, and the search found none. Then there was the location. The Cyclops had vanished in a stretch of the Atlantic that would later gain infamy as part of the Bermuda Triangle. While skeptics dismiss such notions as folklore, the coincidence was impossible to ignore. Here was a region where ships and aircraft seemed to disappear with unusual frequency, where compasses spun wildly and radio communications failed without explanation. Whether natural phenomenon or something more mysterious, the area had already claimed vessels before the Cyclops and would continue to do so long after. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the mystery wasn't the disappearance itself. It was what followed. Over the coming decades, two of the Cyclops' sister ships, the USS Nereus and USS Proteus, would vanish under eerily similar circumstances. Both carried heavy loads of ore. Both disappeared without trace in the same general area of the Atlantic. Both left behind the same haunting silence that had marked their sister's fate. 3 identical ships, 3 identical cargoes, 3 identical disappearances. The odds of coincidence seemed to shrink with each loss, suggesting something more deliberate, more systematic. Some force, natural or otherwise, appeared to be targeting these specific vessels, removing them from existence with surgical precision. In the harbour archives of Barbados, a single entry marks the Cyclops' final confirmed location, departed March 4, 1918, bound for Baltimore. Good weather, crew in good health, cargo secure. Below it, in different handwriting, someone had added a single word: never arrived. Today, the mystery endures. Deep-sea exploration has mapped much of the Atlantic floor, locating wrecks from centuries past. Advanced sonar can detect metal signatures miles below the surface. Satellite technology tracks even the smallest debris fields, yet the Cyclops remains invisible, a ship that sailed into history and left no footprints behind. Sometimes, late at night in naval academies, instructors tell their students about the Cyclops, not as a cautionary tale about seamanship or weather, but as a reminder of the ocean's ultimate power, the ability to make things disappear so completely that they might never have existed at all. The students listen, take notes, and file the story away with other maritime mysteries, but some, years later, standing watch on their own ships in the vast Atlantic darkness, remember the tale differently. They remember a vessel that sailed into nothing and became nothing, carrying 306 souls into a silence so complete that even their echoes were swallowed by the sea. The USS Cyclops teaches us that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to remind us how small we are, how easily we can vanish, and how the ocean keeps its deepest secrets in places where light has never touched and time itself seems to stop. In the end, somewhere in the Atlantic depths, the Cyclops may still be sailing, forever trapped in that moment between existence and oblivion, carrying her crew through an endless voyage that no map will ever chart, and no harbor will ever welcome home. The radio man's voice crackled through the static one final time. "Position report, everything normal." Then the airwaves fell silent, carrying only the whisper of distant storms. February 4th, 1963, marked the last confirmed contact with a vessel that would become maritime history's most volatile mystery. The SS Marine Sulphur Queen had been transformed from a wartime oil tanker into something far more dangerous, a floating cauldron carrying 15,000 tons of molten sulphur at temperatures that could melt human bone. Her conversion from oil transport to industrial chemical hauler represented the kind of post-war innovation that promised efficiency but delivered peril. Built in 1944 during the urgent shipbuilding campaigns of World War II, the vessel had originally served honorably as a T2 tanker, ferrying fuel across submarine-infested waters to keep Allied forces moving. Her steel bones were forged for oil, her tanks designed for liquid petroleum, her ventilation systems calculated for hydrocarbon vapors. When peace came, her owners saw opportunity in the growing chemical industry. A few modifications, some reinforced bulkheads, upgraded heating systems. Suddenly a ship meant for crude oil was hauling liquid sulfur, hot enough to glow. The conversion seemed logical on paper. Molten sulfur flows like oil when heated, making tanker ships ideal for transport. The substance cooled to solid form at its destination, where industrial processes could reshape it into countless products. But sulfur demanded constant heat during transport, requiring specialized pumps, heating coils, and temperature monitoring throughout the voyage. More critically, the chemical reacted violently with seawater, producing toxic gases that could kill in minutes. Captain Fanning commanded the Marine Sulphur Queen when she departed Beaumont, Texas, on February 2nd, 1963. His crew of 39 included men who had sailed these routes for years, veterans of both wartime service and peacetime commerce. They knew the Gulf of Mexico's moods, understood how quickly weather could turn, respected the sea's power to humble even the mightiest vessels. None suspected they were sailing into oblivion. The cargo manifest recorded 15,260 tons of molten sulfur, heated to 275 degrees Fahrenheit and secured in specially modified tanks. The destination was Norfolk, Virginia, where chemical processors waited for delivery. The route would carry them through the Straits of Florida, past Key West, and up the Atlantic coast, a journey that should have taken roughly 5 days under normal conditions. Radio contact remained routine for the first 48 hours. Position reports arrived on schedule, weather updates seemed standard, crew morale appeared good. The ship's last confirmed transmission came from waters near Key West, a brief message confirming their position and estimated arrival time. The radio man signed off normally, with no indication of trouble ahead. When the Marine Sulphur Queen failed to appear at Norfolk on February 7th, port authorities assumed weather delays. February storms in the Atlantic could easily add days to a voyage, and prudent captains often sought shelter rather than fight heavy seas. But as days stretched into weeks without word, concern transformed into alarm. The Coast Guard launched one of its most extensive peacetime search operations, deploying ships and aircraft across 350,000 square miles of ocean. They found fragments, life preservers marked with the ship's name, small pieces of debris that might have come from any vessel, an oil slick that could have indicated anything, but no lifeboats, no major wreckage, no bodies, no definitive proof of what had destroyed a 523-foot tanker and everyone aboard. The absence of substantial debris puzzled investigators. Modern ships don't simply evaporate, even when catastrophically destroyed. Steel floats before it rusts. Lifeboats break free automatically when ships sink. Emergency beacons should have activated. Yet the Marine Sulphur Queen had apparently disintegrated so completely that the ocean yielded almost nothing. Former crew members who had sailed aboard the vessel provided troubling testimony. Several described the ship as increasingly unreliable, plagued by structural cracks and mechanical failures that management seemed reluctant to address properly. One sailor had reportedly called her a disaster waiting to happen after observing hull stress fractures during loading operations. Others mentioned unusual vibrations concerning noises from the modified cargo tanks, and an overall sense that the vessel was being pushed beyond its safe operational limits. The conversion from oil to sulfur transport had indeed created new vulnerabilities. Oil and molten chemicals behave differently under stress. Where petroleum might simply leak if containment failed, superheated sulfur could react explosively with seawater, creating dense clouds of toxic gases while generating tremendous heat. If the ship's hull had cracked, allowing seawater to contact the molten cargo, the resulting reaction could have been devastating enough to destroy all evidence of the disaster. Weather data from the relevant time frame showed no major storms in the area, though the Florida Straits remained notorious for sudden squalls and unpredictable seas. Rogue waves, those solitary giants that can appear without warning, represented another possibility. A 100-foot wall of water striking an already compromised hull could have crushed the vessel instantly, driving it to the bottom before survivors could launch lifeboats. The ship's disappearance occurred along the edges of what would later be dubbed the Bermuda Triangle, adding supernatural speculation to more mundane explanations. Electromagnetic anomalies, navigational interference, even extraterrestrial involvement found their way into various theories. While such ideas lacked supporting evidence, they reflected public fascination with unexplained disappearances in these particular waters. Marine Transport Lines, the vessel's owner, faced intense scrutiny and eventual litigation from families of the lost crew. Internal documents revealed the company had deferred maintenance, ignored structural warnings, and prioritized profit margins over safety upgrades. The Marine Sulphur Queen represented a broader pattern of corporate negligence in the post-war shipping industry, where aging vessels were retrofitted for new purposes without adequate safety considerations. Coast Guard investigators concluded that structural failure offered the most plausible explanation, though they acknowledged the lack of physical evidence made definitive determination impossible. Their official report criticized both the ship's condition and the inherent dangers of its sulfur-carrying modification. New regulations eventually emerged requiring stricter safety standards for chemical tankers, though these changes came too late for the Marine Sulphur Queen's crew. Deep-sea exploration technology has advanced dramatically since 1963. Sonar systems can now map seafloors with remarkable precision, while remotely operated vehicles can investigate wrecks at depths once thought impossible to reach. Yet the marine Sulphur Queen remains invisible, either destroyed so completely that no recognizable pieces survive, or resting in some deep trench where detection remains impossible. The mystery endures partly because it represents maritime commerce at its most dangerous intersection, where economic pressure meets engineering limits, where chemical innovation encounters oceanic forces beyond human control. The marine Sulphur Queen carried within her holds the very elements that may have assured her destruction: superheated chemicals that could react explosively with the sea itself. In maritime academies today, the case serves as required study for students learning about cargo safety, structural integrity, and the consequences of inadequate maintenance. The lesson is clear. The ocean shows no mercy to vessels that venture beyond their design capabilities, regardless of economic incentives or schedule pressures. Somewhere beneath the Atlantic swells, the truth waits in darkness that sunlight has never touched. Whether scattered as unrecognizable fragments or resting intact in some deep canyon, the marine Sulphur Queen holds answers that families still seek and investigators still pursue. She reminds us that even in an age of satellite communication and advanced navigation, ships can still vanish as completely as if the sea had opened beneath them and swallowed them whole. The radio man's final transmission echoes across 6 decades. Position report, everything normal. Those words became both epitaph and mystery, marking the moment when routine voyage transformed into maritime legend, when molten cargo met salt water in ways that left only silence behind. Fresh fish lay perfectly arranged in the ice hold, as if the crew had stepped away for just a moment and planned to return. An Australian Coast Guard patrol on January 8, 2003, encountered something that challenged every assumption about abandoned vessels. Drifting 800 miles off Western Australia's coast, a modest fishing boat rode the swells with mechanical precision, engine humming, fuel tanks full, navigation lights blinking steadily. The name High Aim 6 stood clearly painted across her stern, yet no human hand guided her wheel, no voice answered radio calls, no movement stirred on her deck. The vessel had begun life as countless fishing boats do, built for function rather than beauty, designed to chase schools of tuna across the Pacific's vast hunting grounds. Her Taiwanese builders had crafted her for endurance, equipping her with refrigeration systems, fish holds, and long-range fuel capacity that could sustain weeks at sea. Captain Chen Tai-chung had commanded her since departing Liu Chu port in late 2002, leading a crew of 10 experienced fishermen toward waters known for abundant catches. Their mission appeared straightforward enough. Commercial fishing demanded long voyages, patient waiting, and the skill to locate fish in an ocean that seemed empty to untrained eyes. The High Aim 6 carried modern equipment: sonar for fish detection, radio for communication, GPS for navigation. Her crew knew these waters, understood seasonal patterns, possessed the expertise to fill their holds and return home profitably. Contact with shore remained routine through December 2002. Radio checks confirmed their position, weather reports seemed normal, catch updates suggested successful fishing. Then communication simply stopped. Missing a scheduled check-in might indicate equipment failure, or crew focus on particularly productive fishing grounds. 2 missed contacts raised mild concern. 3 weeks of silence transformed worry into alarm. The Australian patrol vessel encountered the High Aim 6 purely by chance, while conducting routine surveillance in international waters. From a distance, nothing seemed amiss, a working fishing boat travelling steadily through moderate seas. Only when they attempted radio contact did the strangeness become apparent. No response to hails, no acknowledgement of signals, no sign of human activity aboard a vessel that clearly remained operational. Boarding revealed a scene frozen in ordinary routine. Personal belongings sat exactly where their owners had left them. Clothes folded in bunks, photographs tucked into mirror frames, toiletries arranged on small shelves. The galley contained prepared food, still fresh enough to suggest recent abandonment. Most unnervingly, the fish hold contained the crew's recent catch, properly iced and sorted, as if they had been working normally until moments before vanishing. The ship's engine ran smoothly, automatically maintaining power to essential systems. Fuel gauges showed tanks nearly full, enough for weeks of additional operation. Navigation equipment functioned perfectly, though the missing logbook prevented investigators from reconstructing the vessel's recent course. Whatever had driven 10 experienced fishermen to abandon their ship had occurred suddenly, without time for distress signals or emergency procedures. Indonesian authorities eventually located Supriyanto, one of the missing crew members, living quietly in a coastal village. His account raised more questions than answers. He claimed the crew had been murdered during a mutiny, though he provided no details about perpetrators, motives, or methods. When pressed for specifics, he grew evasive, offering contradictory statements that satisfied no one. His presence on land proved the crew could reach safety, yet explained nothing about the 9 men who remained missing. Mutiny theories gained some traction among investigators. Fishing crews worked in isolation for weeks, creating tensions that could explode into violence under the wrong circumstances. But mutinies typically involved disputes over pay, working conditions, or leadership, none of which seemed relevant to the High Aim 6's situation. More puzzling, successful mutineers would likely have kept the valuable vessel rather than abandoning it to drift aimlessly. Piracy offered another explanation. Modern pirates sometimes captured fishing crews for ransom or forced labor, leaving vessels to drift as evidence of their activities. The pristine condition of the High Aim 6 argued against violent piracy, though sophisticated criminal organizations might have removed the crew for reasons unknown. Yet no ransom demands ever surfaced. No intelligence networks reported new forced laborers. No criminal organizations claimed responsibility. The illegal fishing hypothesis suggested economic rather than violent motives. Crews engaged in unauthorized fishing might abandon their vessel if approached by patrol boats or international enforcement agencies. But the High Aim 6 had been discovered in international waters where Taiwan maintained legitimate fishing rights. Her cargo of properly sorted fish showed no evidence of illegal species or quantities that might trigger desperate flight. Smuggling provided yet another possibility. Fishing boats often served as convenient covers for transporting drugs, weapons, or human cargo across international boundaries. Discovery by law enforcement might prompt crews to abandon ship and escape via hidden boats or accomplice vessels. But thorough searches revealed no contraband, no hidden compartments, no evidence of criminal activity beyond legitimate fishing operations. Physical evidence supported none of these theories conclusively. The missing lifeboat indicated deliberate departure, yet lifeboats offered poor survival prospects in the open Pacific. No distress beacons had activated, though modern vessels carried multiple emergency signaling devices. Most critically, the preserved condition of the catch suggested abandonment within days of discovery, raising questions about how the crew had survived in lifeboats for weeks. Taiwanese investigators examined the vessel exhaustively after its return, searching for clues that might explain the disappearance. They found mechanical systems in excellent condition, cargo properly secured, personal effects that revealed nothing unusual about the crew's state of mind. The missing logbook represented the single significant absence, and the most frustrating, since it might have contained crucial information about the vessel's final days. Weather records showed no severe storms in the relevant area during the estimated time frame. Satellite imagery revealed no unusual vessel traffic that might indicate piracy or other criminal activity. Ocean current models demonstrated that an abandoned vessel could indeed drift from known fishing grounds to the discovery location, but provided no insights into why abandonment had occurred. The case gradually faded from international attention as investigators exhausted promising leads. Suprianto's contradictory statements led nowhere. The 9 missing crew members never surfaced, alive or dead. No similar incidents involving other fishing vessels provided comparative insights. The High Aim 6 herself was eventually returned to commercial service under new ownership, though her reputation as a cursed vessel made crew recruitment challenging. Modern maritime mysteries rarely achieve satisfying resolution. Unlike aircraft, which carry flight recorders and maintain constant radar contact, fishing vessels often operate beyond surveillance networks that might document their final hours. The vast Pacific offers countless hiding places for evidence, whether criminal activities or simple accidents that leave no witnesses. The High Aim 6 represents something deeper than maritime accident or criminal activity. She embodies the ocean's capacity to transform the familiar into the inexplicable, to take ordinary commercial ventures and render them ghostly. Her crew didn't vanish because of storms or mechanical failure. They disappeared because human motivations sometimes lead to actions that leave no rational explanation behind. Somewhere in the Pacific's immensity, answers may still float. Wreckage from a missing lifeboat, remains of 9 fishermen, evidence of whatever drama played out aboard a vessel that lost its crew but kept its secrets. Until then, the High Aim 6 serves as a reminder that the sea's greatest mysteries sometimes involve not what it destroys, but what it preserves. Empty ships sailing toward horizons they will never reach, carrying questions that may never find answers. October 25, 1980, brought the kind of routine radio transmission that defines modern maritime commerce. Position confirmed, weather fair, estimated arrival on schedule. Those words, crackling across thousands of miles of Atlantic Ocean, marked the final communication from SS Poet, a 522-foot cargo vessel carrying 34 souls and 13,500 tons of corn toward a destination she would never reach. What followed wasn't the dramatic final moments of storm-battered ships or the desperate mayday calls of vessels fighting for survival. Instead came something far more unsettling, absolute silence, where a massive cargo ship had simply ceased to exist. The Poet belonged to that generation of vessels born from wartime necessity and reshaped by peacetime commerce. Built in 1944 during the urgent shipbuilding campaigns that fed Allied victory, she had originally served as a Liberty ship. One of those utilitarian workhorses designed for quick construction and reliable service rather than elegance or longevity. Decades later, converted and modernized for bulk cargo transport, she retained the sturdy bones of her wartime heritage while carrying the accumulated wear of nearly 4 decades at sea. Her final voyage began unremarkably at Philadelphia's commercial docks, where stevedores loaded her holds with golden corn bound for Egyptian markets. Captain Melvin Hughes commanded the vessel, leading a crew of experienced merchant mariners who viewed the Atlantic crossing as routine work. Port Said represented just another destination in a career spent moving American grain to international buyers, profitable commerce that kept global trade flowing and families fed across distant continents. The cargo manifest recorded 13,500 tons of corn, properly secured and destined for Egyptian millers who would transform it into bread, animal feed, and countless other products. Nothing unusual marked the loading process. No delays troubled the departure schedule. No mechanical issues delayed the evening departure on October 24th. Harbor pilots guided the Poet through Philadelphia's shipping channels without incident, setting her course toward the open Atlantic, and a journey that should have concluded safely in Egyptian waters. Maritime communication in 1980 relied on scheduled radio contacts that allowed shipping companies to track their vessels' progress across ocean distances. The Poet's first transmission arrived exactly as expected: position coordinates, weather observations, mechanical status reports that painted a picture of normal operations aboard a properly functioning vessel. Radio operators noted nothing unusual in the transmission quality or the crew's demeanor. Everything suggested a routine voyage proceeding according to plan. Then the voice went silent. Missing a scheduled radio contact might indicate equipment failure, atmospheric interference, or crew distraction during busy periods. 2 missed contacts raised mild concern among company officials monitoring the vessel's progress. 3 days without communication transformed worry into alarm, particularly as the Poet approached the Azores, a checkpoint where ships typically confirmed their mid-Atlantic position before continuing toward European or Mediterranean destinations. Coast Guard officials launched search operations across hundreds of thousands of square miles, deploying aircraft and vessels in expanding patterns around the Poet's last known position. Search teams scanned empty horizons for any sign of the missing vessel: floating debris, oil slicks, emergency beacons, anything that might indicate where a 522-foot cargo ship had met her fate. Days stretched into weeks as search patterns expanded farther from the shipping lanes, covering areas where disabled vessels might have drifted with currents and winds. The ocean yielded nothing. No wreckage surfaced, no lifeboats washed ashore on distant islands, no distress signals reached rescue stations, no passing vessels reported encounters with debris fields or survivors clinging to floating wreckage. The Poet had vanished as completely as if she had sailed beyond the edge of the world itself, leaving only empty water where a massive steel vessel should have left some trace of her passing. Investigators examined every possibility their experience suggested. Atlantic storms could indeed sink cargo ships, particularly when rogue waves, those solitary giants that tower above normal swells, struck vessels already struggling with heavy seas. The Poet's age raised questions about structural integrity, though recent inspections had certified her seaworthy. Mechanical failures might have disabled engines, steering, or electrical systems, leaving the crew helpless as their vessel drifted into disaster. Each theory crumbled under scrutiny. Weather records showed no major storms along the Poet's intended route during the relevant time frame. Even catastrophic mechanical failure would typically allow time for distress signals, emergency beacon activation, or lifeboat deployment. Modern cargo ships carried multiple communication systems specifically designed to function during emergencies. The complete absence of any distress calls suggested something had overwhelmed the vessel too quickly for any response. More disturbing possibilities emerged as investigators considered the political context of 1980. Cold War tensions influenced global shipping, particularly for vessels carrying American cargo to Middle Eastern destinations. Some theorists suggested the Poet might have been targeted by hostile forces seeking to disrupt grain shipments or demonstrate their capability to strike at commercial vessels. The early 1980s marked a period of heightened international tensions, with various conflicts creating security concerns for merchant shipping. Speculation grew around the possibility of covert cargo, weapons or intelligence materials hidden among the corn shipment and destined for Egyptian allies. Such theories suggested the Poet might have been deliberately eliminated to prevent sensitive materials from reaching their intended recipients. Submarine attacks, aircraft strikes, or boarding operations by hostile forces could potentially explain the vessel's complete disappearance without leaving evidence. These darker scenarios received serious consideration from intelligence agencies, though no evidence ever emerged to support them. No hostile nations claimed responsibility. No intelligence networks detected increased military activity in the relevant area. No diplomatic communications suggested awareness of an attack on American shipping. The theories remained speculation, unsupported by facts. Family members of the lost crew pressed for answers that never came. 34 men had simply vanished along with their ship, leaving behind wives, children, and parents who deserved explanations that maritime authorities couldn't provide. Coast Guard officials eventually declared the case closed, citing insufficient evidence to determine the poet's fate. The official conclusion, lost at sea due to unknown causes, satisfied no one while acknowledging the limits of maritime investigation. Modern oceanographic technology has advanced dramatically since 1980. Satellite tracking, deep-sea sonar mapping, and underwater exploration capabilities now exist that could potentially locate wrecks in areas once thought impossible to search. Yet the poet remains invisible, either destroyed so completely that no recognizable wreckage survives, or resting in some deep trench beyond current detection capabilities. The case represents maritime mystery in its purest form, a vessel that sailed into history without leaving footprints. Unlike ghost ships found drifting empty or wrecks discovered decades later, the poet simply ended. Her story lacks the romantic tragedy of storm-battered sailing ships or the dramatic final moments of vessels fighting impossible odds. Instead, she offers a proof that even in the modern era of satellite communication and international rescue coordination, ships can still vanish as completely as if they had never existed. Somewhere in the Atlantic depths, the truth waits in darkness that has never known sunlight. Whether scattered as unrecognizable fragments across the seafloor or resting intact in some unexplored canyon, the poet keeps her secrets as thoroughly as the ocean keeps its own. Her silence reminds us that the sea's greatest power isn't its ability to destroy dramatically, but its capacity to erase completely, removing vessels, crews, and answers so thoroughly that only questions remain floating on the surface of our understanding. The Clan McIntyre's officer lowered his binoculars with satisfaction. The morning signal exchange had been routine, almost mundane in its normalcy. July 27, 1909, brought clear skies and moderate seas off the South African coast as two vessels acknowledged each other with the casual efficiency that marked commercial shipping. The cargo ship, Clan McIntyre, had spotted the passenger liner SS Waratah steaming confidently toward Cape Town, her distinctive silhouette unmistakable against the horizon. Signal flags snapped in the morning breeze, conveying standard pleasantries between crews who shared the same ocean highways. Everything appeared normal aboard the luxury liner. No distress signals, no unusual behavior, no indication that within hours she would vanish so completely that her name would echo through maritime history as one of the sea's greatest mysteries. The Waratah embodied the ambitious spirit of Edwardian passenger shipping, when ocean travel represented both necessity and prestige. Built in 1908 by the Blue Anchor Line, she stretched 465 feet along the waterline and displaced over 9,300 tons. A floating palace designed to carry wealthy passengers in comfort while simultaneously hauling the cargo that connected Britain's empire to its furthest colonies. Her designers had crafted something unique. Luxury accommodations above decks matched with cavernous cargo holds below, creating a vessel that promised both passenger comfort and commercial profit. First-class travelers aboard the Waratah enjoyed amenities that rivaled the finest hotels: ornate dining rooms paneled in polished wood, smoking lounges equipped with leather chairs and crystal decanters, cabins fitted with electric lighting and private wash basins. The ship's grand staircase swept dramatically between decks while her promenade offered passengers space to stroll and observe the ocean's endless horizons. Below this elegant world, massive holds waited to receive Australia's exports, bales of wool, frozen meat, precious metals, and manufactured goods that represented the colony's growing economic importance. Her maiden voyage from London to Sydney in 1908 had proceeded without major incident, though experienced sailors noticed troubling characteristics that would later gain ominous significance. The Waratah exhibited a peculiar rolling motion in heavy seas, a sluggish response to ocean swells that suggested fundamental stability issues. Passengers reported feeling uneasy during rough weather, sensing something wrong in the ship's movement through the water. Crew members whispered about her tendency to list uncomfortably when cargo shifted, requiring constant attention to ballast management. These concerns reached professional maritime circles, where naval architects debated the wisdom of combining passenger luxury with heavy cargo capacity. The ship's design represented a compromise between competing demands. Passenger comfort required wide, stable accommodations, while cargo efficiency demanded deep holds and flexible loading arrangements. Some experts question whether this dual purpose had created inherent stability problems that could prove dangerous in severe weather. Captain Joshua Ilbery commanded the Waratah during her final voyage, bringing decades of experience to what should have been a routine passage between colonial ports. His crew included officers familiar with South African waters, sailors who understood the treacherous currents where the Indian and Atlantic Oceans converged. The passenger manifest listed 211 souls aboard, including families returning to England and business travellers completing colonial assignments. The vessel had departed Durban on July 26, 1909, carrying a mixed cargo that included wool, hides, and general merchandise bound for English markets. Weather forecasts suggested moderate conditions, though experienced mariners knew that South African waters could change rapidly, transforming calm seas into deadly challenges without warning. The route to Cape Town followed well-established shipping lanes, but these same waters had claimed numerous vessels over the decades. That final morning's signal exchange with the Clan McIntyre occurred roughly 150 miles from Cape Town, placing the Waratah within hours of her intended destination. The cargo ship's crew observed nothing unusual, no distress flags, no signs of mechanical trouble, no indication that the passenger liner faced any difficulties. The Waratah appeared to be maintaining normal speed and course, her smokestack producing the steady stream that indicated properly functioning engines. But she never reached Cape Town. As hours passed without the liner's expected arrival, port authorities grew concerned. The Waratah carried a schedule to maintain, passengers to disembark, cargo to unload. Her failure to appear triggered increasingly urgent communications with other vessels in the area, followed by organized search efforts that would eventually span weeks and cover thousands of square miles. Initial search efforts focused on the direct route between Durban and Cape Town, where mechanical failure or navigational error might have forced emergency stops. Coastal stations scanned the horizon for smoke plumes or distress signals. Ships reported no unusual sightings, no wreckage floating in the shipping lanes, no lifeboats carrying survivors from a missing passenger liner. The Waratah had apparently vanished without leaving any trace of her passage. As days stretched into weeks, search patterns expanded to cover areas where disabled vessels might have drifted with prevailing currents. The waters off South Africa carried powerful flows that could carry wreckage hundreds of miles from disaster sites. Aircraft eventually joined the search, scanning vast ocean areas from altitudes that revealed details invisible to surface vessels. Still nothing emerged to explain the disappearance of over 200 people aboard a modern passenger liner. Theories multiplied as investigators examined every possibility that might explain such a complete disappearance. the ship's questionable stability became a primary focus. If cargo had shifted suddenly during rough weather, the resulting list might have been impossible to correct. The Waratah's design flaws could have transformed minor instability into catastrophic capsizing, overwhelming the vessel before crews could launch lifeboats or send distress signals. Structural failure offered another explanation. The combination of passenger accommodations and heavy cargo holds created stress points that might have proven vulnerable under extreme conditions. If the ship's keel or critical bulkheads had failed during heavy weather, she could have broken apart and sunk within minutes. The violence of such destruction might have prevented any debris from reaching the surface, explaining the complete absence of floating wreckage. Weather records from the relevant period showed no major storms along the Waratah's intended route, though local conditions could change rapidly in waters where different ocean systems converged. Rogue waves, those solitary giants that appeared without warning, were not yet scientifically understood in 1909, though sailors had reported encounters with such phenomena for centuries. A wave towering 80 feet above normal sea levels could have struck the already unstable liner with devastating force. Navigation error presented another possibility. Captain Ilbery, despite his experience, might have misjudged his position during night sailing or poor visibility conditions. The South African coast contained numerous hazards, submerged rocks, uncharted shoals, treacherous currents that could drive vessels onto hidden obstacles. A grounding in deep water far from shore might have led to rapid sinking without survivors reaching safety. More sinister theories emerged as the case gained international attention. Some suggested deliberate sabotage, though no evidence supported claims of bombs or internal sabotage. Others proposed collision with an unknown vessel, perhaps a ship engaged in illegal activities that fled the scene rather than assist survivors. These dramatic explanations captured public imagination but lacked factual foundation. Insurance companies faced massive claims from the Waratah's disappearance, leading to extensive investigations that revealed troubling details about the ship's condition and operation. Documents emerged showing that maritime inspectors had noted stability concerns during earlier voyages, though these reports had not prevented the vessel from continuing service. The Blue Anchor Line faced intense scrutiny over their decision to operate a ship with known stability issues. Legal proceedings dragged on for years as families of missing passengers and crew sought compensation and answers. Courts struggled with cases involving people who had simply vanished. No bodies to confirm death, no wreckage to establish cause, no witnesses to describe final moments. The Waratah disaster helped establish legal precedents for handling maritime disappearances where traditional evidence was completely absent. Treasure hunter Emlyn Brown devoted over 2 decades to searching for the Waratah's wreck, using increasingly sophisticated equipment to scan the South African seafloor. His expeditions located numerous historical wrecks and geological formations, but never found conclusive evidence of the missing liner. Each promising sonar contact ultimately proved disappointing. Rocks shaped like ship hulls, unrelated wrecks from different eras, natural formations that mimicked human construction. The search efforts revealed the incredible difficulty of locating specific wrecks in deep ocean environments. Even with precise coordinates and advanced equipment, the seafloor could hide evidence for decades or centuries. The Waratah might rest intact in some unexplored canyon, or she might have broken apart so completely that her remains were scattered beyond recognition across miles of ocean bottom. Phantom ship sightings began almost immediately after the Waratah's disappearance, with sailors reporting encounters with vessels matching her distinctive profile. These accounts described ships that appeared briefly before vanishing, leading to speculation about supernatural explanations for the mystery. While such stories reflected maritime folklore rather than factual evidence, they demonstrated the psychological impact of the Waratah's unexplained fate on those who made their living at sea. Cape Town's Maritime Museum maintains a permanent exhibit dedicated to the Waratah mystery, displaying artifacts from the era and documenting the various search efforts over the decades. School groups learn about the disaster as part of South African maritime history, while researchers continue examining historical records for clues that earlier investigators might have overlooked. The shipping industry implemented new stability requirements and passenger safety regulations, partly in response to lessons learned from the Waratah case. Her disappearance highlighted the dangers of compromising ship design for commercial convenience, leading to stricter oversight of vessels carrying both passengers and heavy cargo. These changes came too late for the 211 people aboard the missing liner, but may have prevented similar tragedies in subsequent decades. Today, the Waratah endures as more than historical curiosity. She represents the ocean's ultimate authority over human ambition. Her story reminds us that even the most modern vessels of their era, equipped with experienced crews and operating in familiar waters, remain vulnerable to forces beyond human control or understanding. She sailed into legend not because she fought heroically against impossible odds, but because she simply vanished, leaving behind only questions that the sea has never chosen to answer. Blood-stained bandages lay scattered across the cabin floor, suggesting violence where none should have occurred in these peaceful Pacific waters. November 10th, 1955, brought an encounter that would puzzle maritime investigators for decades. A merchant vessel spotted something unusual drifting near Fiji, a ship listing heavily to starboard, her deck awash with seawater, yet somehow still afloat despite obvious distress. As the rescue vessel approached, they realized this was no ordinary derelict. The name MV Joyita was clearly visible across her stern, identifying a vessel that had vanished 5 weeks earlier with 25 souls aboard, sparking one of the Pacific's most extensive search operations. The Joyita carried a history as colorful as the tropical waters she sailed. Built in 1931 as a luxury yacht for wealthy Americans, she had lived through multiple incarnations: pleasure craft, military vessel, cargo hauler, passenger ferry. During World War II, she served the war effort in Pacific waters, surviving combat that claimed countless other vessels. Her post-war conversion to cargo and passenger service reflected the practical needs of island commerce, where reliable transportation between scattered communities meant the difference between prosperity and isolation. By 1955, the Joyita had found steady employment connecting Samoa with the remote Tokelau Islands, carrying supplies, mail, passengers, and the occasional medical personnel to communities that might otherwise go months without outside contact. Her route covered 270 miles of open Pacific, a journey that typically required 2 days under normal conditions. The work was routine but essential, linking isolated island populations to the broader world. October 3rd, 1955, marked what should have been another routine departure from Apia, Samoa. The passenger manifest listed 9 individuals, including a doctor, traveling to perform emergency medical procedures on one of the outer islands. Captain Thomas Miller commanded the vessel, leading a crew of 16 experienced Pacific sailors who knew these waters intimately. Weather conditions appeared favorable, mechanical systems seemed functional, and nothing suggested this voyage would differ from dozens of previous runs. The planned itinerary called for arrival at the Tokelau Islands within 48 hours, followed by the doctor's medical work and return journey to Samoa. Island communities depended on such scheduled services, and any significant delay would trigger concern among families waiting for relatives or supplies. When the Joyita failed to appear on schedule, authorities initially assumed weather delays or minor mechanical issues had extended the voyage. As days passed without communication, concern escalated into alarm. The vast Pacific offered countless hazards: sudden storms, mechanical failures, navigational errors that could leave vessels stranded far from their intended routes. Search aircraft began systematic patterns over likely drift areas, while vessels in the region received alerts to watch for signs of the missing ship or her passengers. The search expanded daily as currents and winds could have carried survivors or wreckage hundreds of miles from the original route. Week after week passed without success. The Pacific seemed to have swallowed the Joyita completely, leaving no trace of her passage or fate. Search coordinators began considering the possibility that the vessel had been lost with all hands, perhaps overwhelmed by sudden weather or catastrophic mechanical failure. Such disappearances, while tragic, were not unknown in waters where ships often sailed beyond reliable communication range. Then came the discovery that transformed mystery into something far more disturbing. The merchant vessel that spotted the drifting Joyita found her in a condition that defied easy explanation. She floated partially submerged but stable, her cork-lined hull living up to its reputation for unsinkable buoyancy. Her engine had stopped, leaving her to drift with prevailing currents, yet she showed no signs of the catastrophic damage that might explain total abandonment. Boarding parties found a scene that suggested sudden, violent departure. Personal belongings lay scattered through the passenger accommodations, as if people had left hurriedly without time to collect their possessions. Medical supplies had been hastily opened and used, with bandages and medications scattered across surfaces where someone had apparently treated injuries. Most ominously, bloodstains marked cabin floors and walls, indicating that at least one person had been seriously hurt before the abandonment. The ship's lifeboats were missing, along with navigational equipment and the vessel's logbook. Someone had deliberately removed essential survival gear and documentation, suggesting planned departure rather than panic-driven flight. The radio had been tuned to international distress frequencies, though no emergency transmission had ever been received by shore stations or passing vessels. This detail particularly puzzled investigators. Why prepare to send distress calls but never actually transmit them? Cargo holds revealed another puzzle. Barrels of fuel oil, medical supplies, and general merchandise remained untouched and properly secured. If pirates had attacked the vessel, valuable cargo should have been the primary target. If mechanical failure had threatened the ship, crew members would typically have attempted to save portable valuables before abandoning ship. The pristine condition of the cargo suggested neither piracy nor panic-driven evacuation. The large hole discovered in the Joyita's deck might have indicated collision damage, but its characteristics didn't match typical accident patterns. The opening appeared to have been caused by internal forces rather than external impact, possibly from cargo shifting during heavy rolling or from structural failure under stress. Yet the damage seemed insufficient to force immediate abandonment of a vessel designed with compartmentalized construction and cork-lined hull protection. Medical examination of the bloodstains revealed human origin, but couldn't determine the extent of injuries or number of victims involved. The blood patterns suggested someone had been hurt seriously enough to require substantial bandaging, though whether from accident, violence, or medical emergency remained unclear. The scattered medical supplies indicated treatment had been attempted, but whether successfully or not could never be determined. Multiple theories emerged to explain the mysterious abandonment. Mechanical failure might have caused the crew to believe the ship was sinking, leading to premature evacuation in lifeboats that subsequently encountered fatal weather. The Joyita's cork hull design meant she could remain afloat even when severely damaged, but crew members might not have trusted this protection during emergency conditions. Piracy remained possible despite the untouched cargo. Modern pirates sometimes focused on human captives rather than goods, particularly if they sought forced labor or ransom opportunities. The bloodstains could indicate resistance during capture, while the missing lifeboats might have carried captives to unknown destinations. However, no ransom demands ever emerged, and no intelligence suggested increased pirate activity in the region. Violence among passengers or crew offered another explanation. The isolated conditions aboard small vessels during long voyages could create tensions that exploded into physical confrontation. If fighting had broken out, the victors might have forced survivors overboard before abandoning the damaged vessel themselves. The missing logbook would have contained records that might have revealed brewing conflicts. Medical emergency provided a more benign possibility. If the traveling doctor had encountered complications requiring emergency evacuation of patients, the crew might have attempted to reach shore using lifeboats while leaving the Joyita to drift. But this scenario didn't explain the blood evidence or the apparent haste of departure. The case, officially closed after extensive investigation, failed to locate the missing 25 people or conclusively determine their fate. Families received death certificates based on presumed loss at sea, though many never accepted that explanation without concrete evidence. The Joyita herself was eventually salvaged and returned to commercial service, though her reputation as an unlucky vessel made crew recruitment difficult. Pacific Island communities still discuss the Joyita mystery during long evenings when fishing boats return, with stories of strange sightings or unexplained phenomena. Local folklore has absorbed the case, transforming it into cautionary tales about respecting ocean spirits and heeding warning signs that modern technology cannot detect. Elderly residents claim their ancestors predicted the disaster through traditional signs that foreign captains ignored. Maritime safety regulations in the Pacific were strengthened partly in response to lessons learned from the Joyita case. Communication requirements, emergency equipment standards, and passenger manifest procedures all received updates designed to prevent similar disappearances. These changes provided some meaning to the tragedy, though they came too late to help the missing 25 souls. The Joyita's story endures because it represents the fragility of human endeavor in the vast Pacific. Unlike the romantic mysteries of sailing ship era, her case involved modern vessel with radio communication, experienced crew, and well-traveled routes. Yet something transformed a routine inter-island voyage into a ghostly puzzle that investigators could never solve. She reminds us that even in the age of aviation and radio, the ocean can still swallow lives as completely as if they had never existed, leaving behind only scattered clues and unanswered questions floating on the surface of an indifferent sea. The blizzard cleared to reveal nothing but empty ice where a ship had been trapped just hours before. Arctic storms possess a violence unknown in warmer seas, winds that scream across frozen wastelands, snow that blinds and disorients, cold that can kill in minutes. When such a tempest struck the crew sheltering beside their icebound vessel in 1931, they huddled in makeshift shelters and waited for nature's fury to exhaust itself. The SS Baychimo had been their livelihood, their connection to civilization, their means of survival in one of Earth's most hostile environments. When morning came and the storm had passed, they discovered something that would transform their abandoned cargo ship into maritime legend. The Baychimo was gone, not sunk, not crushed by ice, but simply absent from the frozen prison that had held her captive for weeks. Where 1,300 tons of steel and cargo had sat immobilized, only broken ice and empty Arctic sky remained. The crew initially assumed the worst, that crushing ice flows had finally claimed their vessel, dragging her beneath the surface to join countless other ships in the Arctic's underwater graveyard. But reports from Inuit hunters soon revealed something far stranger. The Baychimo had been spotted drifting free, moving through ice channels with ghostly purpose. Built in 1914 during the golden age of Arctic commerce, the Baychimo embodied the rugged pragmatism required for northern trade. Her German builders had crafted her specifically for ice navigation, reinforcing her hull against the crushing forces that destroyed lesser vessels. At 230 feet long and weighing over 1,300 tons, she possessed the size and strength necessary to carry valuable cargo through waters that challenged even the most experienced Arctic navigators. The Hudson's Bay Company acquired the vessel after World War I, recognizing her potential for the lucrative fur trade that connected remote northern communities with southern markets. For over a decade, the Baychimo proved her worth, carrying fox pelts, seal skins, and general supplies between Arctic trading posts and commercial centers. Her annual voyages followed routes established by centuries of northern commerce, threading through ice channels that opened and closed with seasonal rhythms older than recorded history. Captain Sidney Cornwell commanded the Baychimo during her final commercial voyage, leading a crew experienced in Arctic conditions who understood both the opportunities and dangers of northern waters. The 1931 season had begun normally enough, cargo loaded, route planned, weather conditions acceptable for the challenging journey ahead. But Arctic ice follows its own schedule, and that year the freeze came earlier and more aggressively than anyone anticipated. By late September, the Baychimo found herself trapped near Banks Island, held fast by ice that thickened daily as temperatures plummeted. Such situations were occupational hazards in Arctic shipping. Crews regularly wintered over when ice prevented escape, using their ships as shelter until spring. Breakup allowed navigation to resume. Cornwell and his men prepared for this possibility, stockpiling supplies and establishing emergency shelters on the ice. The decision to abandon ship came as ice pressure began threatening the hull's integrity. Rather than risk being crushed along with their vessel, the crew evacuated to shelters constructed on the more stable shore ice, planning to monitor the Baychimo's condition and reclaim her when conditions improved. This pragmatic choice reflected standard Arctic survival protocol. Ships could be replaced, but human lives could not. That night's blizzard transformed abandonment into mystery. When visibility returned, the crew discovered their vessel had vanished completely. Initial searches revealed no wreckage, no debris field, no evidence of catastrophic destruction. The ice that had held the Baychimo captive had shifted and cracked, creating leads and channels where none had existed before. Somehow, the ship had escaped her frozen prison and drifted away into the Arctic vastness. Inuit hunters provided the first confirmed sighting, reporting a steamship moving through ice fields several miles from the abandonment site. Their descriptions matched the Baychimo perfectly: distinctive funnel, reinforced bow, general configuration that marked her as different from other Arctic vessels. But when the crew reached the reported location, they found a ship so damaged by ice action that salvage seemed impossible. Hull plates were buckled, superstructure was twisted, and overall condition suggested the vessel was barely seaworthy. The Hudson's Bay Company officially abandoned the Baychimo at this point, writing off the vessel as a total loss and focusing on other ships in their Arctic fleet. Insurance claims were filed, paperwork completed, and the ship was forgotten by commercial interests. But the Arctic had other plans for the stubborn cargo vessel. What followed became one of maritime history's most remarkable ghost stories. Year after year, the Baychimo continued appearing in different Arctic locations, always drifting, always unmanned, always just beyond successful capture. Inuit communities incorporated her into their oral traditions, telling stories of the ship that would not die, the vessel that wandered the ice like a restless spirit. In 1932, scientific expeditions reported encountering the ghost ship, noting her continued deterioration, but also her stubborn refusal to sink. Attempts to board and claim her met with limited success. Arctic weather patterns seemed to conspire against anyone seeking to take control. Storms would arise suddenly, forcing would-be salvagers to flee before completing their work. Ice conditions would shift, carrying the ship away from those attempting to reach her. The most famous encounter occurred in 1939, when a group of explorers managed to board the Baychimo and explore her interior extensively. They discovered cargo still secured in her holds, personal effects left behind by the original crew, equipment and supplies in various states of preservation. The ship had become a floating time capsule, carrying artifacts from her commercial service through an endless Arctic voyage. But even this detailed exploration ended in frustration. Approaching weather forced the expedition to abandon their salvage attempt, leaving the Baychimo to continue her ghostly wandering. Reports suggested the ship actively resisted capture, as if possessed by some supernatural determination to remain free. Scientific expeditions during the 1940s and 1950s occasionally reported Baychimo sightings, though encounters became less frequent as the ship's condition deteriorated. Each sighting revealed further damage, collapsed superstructure, missing equipment, hull breaches that somehow failed to sink her. The vessel appeared to be slowly dissolving while maintaining just enough buoyancy to continue floating. Her last confirmed sighting came in 1969 when travelers reported encountering a barely recognizable hulk that matched her general specifications. By this point, decades of Arctic exposure had reduced the once proud cargo ship to a skeletal framework, held together more by stubbornness than structural integrity. After 1969, the Baychimo vanished completely from human observation. Climate change has transformed the Arctic dramatically since the Baychimo's heyday, opening new shipping routes and bringing increased human activity to previously isolated regions. Modern vessels equipped with satellite communication and GPS navigation regularly traverse waters where the ghost ship once wandered alone. Yet none have reported encounters with her remains. The Northwest Territories Government of Canada has periodically organized searches for the Baychimo, recognizing her value as both historical artifact and tourist attraction. These efforts have located numerous Arctic wrecks and abandoned vessels, but never the specific ship that captured public imagination for nearly 4 decades. The harsh Arctic environment that preserved her for so long may have finally claimed her completely. Inuit elders still tell stories about the Baychimo during long winter nights, describing her appearances to their ancestors and speculating about her ultimate fate. Traditional knowledge holders suggest the ship chose her own destiny, refusing human attempts at control, while following currents and ice patterns according to her own mysterious purpose. These cultural perspectives offer alternative interpretations of the ghost ship phenomenon, viewing her not as abandoned vessel, but as entity with independent agency. Marine archaeologists consider the Baychimo case unique in maritime history. No other vessel is documented as surviving independently for nearly 4 decades after abandonment. Her longevity resulted from specific Arctic conditions that both preserved her structure and prevented final destruction. The combination of cold temperatures, ice protection, and isolation from human interference created circumstances that allowed unprecedented survival. Modern Arctic shipping companies study the Baychimo case when designing vessels for northern service, learning from her construction techniques and understanding how ships behave when abandoned in ice conditions. Her story influences contemporary vessel design, emergency procedures, and abandonment protocols for Arctic operations. The Baychimo represents something profound about human relationship with the sea. Our tendency to attribute personality and intention to vessels that exceed normal expectations. She became legendary not because she sank dramatically or performed heroic service, but because she refused to accept defeat. Her story resonates because it suggests that some ships, like some people, possess an indomitable spirit that transcends physical limitations. Somewhere in the Arctic waters, the truth about her final fate waits beneath ice and snow. Whether she rests on the seafloor as scattered debris or remains somehow afloat in some hidden inlet, the Baychimo earned her place in maritime folklore through sheer persistence. Vessels that continue sailing long after their purpose has ended, carrying the dreams and determination of those who built them into legends that refuse to die. The training ship's departure from Bermuda had been witnessed by dozens of harbor personnel, yet not a single soul would ever testify to seeing her again. January 1880 brought unusually mild weather to the Atlantic shipping lanes, encouraging Captain Francis Stirling to maintain his scheduled departure from Royal Naval Dockyard, Bermuda. The HMS Atlanta rode at anchor with her complement of 281 souls, most barely out of boyhood, eager young men who had volunteered to learn seamanship in the service of Queen Victoria's expanding empire. What should have been a routine training voyage across familiar waters would instead become one of the Royal Navy's most haunting mysteries, a disappearance so complete that it challenged every assumption about how ships and men could vanish from the face of the earth. The Atlanta herself embodied the Royal Navy's pragmatic approach to training future sailors. Originally launched in 1844 as HMS Juno, a sixth-rate frigate designed for patrol duties, she had served honorably in various colonial waters before age, and changing naval technology relegated her to training service. Her 1878 conversion removed most of her armament, replacing gun decks with classrooms, study areas, and expanded berthing for cadets who would learn seamanship through practical experience rather than theoretical instruction alone. At 180 feet long, with 3 masts carrying square-rigged sails, the Atlanta represented traditional naval architecture at its most refined. Her wooden hull bore the scars of decades at sea, yet remained sound enough for training voyages that would teach young sailors to read weather, handle canvas, and navigate by stars. The conversion had added modern conveniences, better ventilation, improved lighting, expanded medical facilities, while preserving the ship's essential character as a sailing vessel dependent on wind and human skill. Captain Stirling commanded the Atlanta with the authority that came from 30 years of naval service, most spent training inexperienced sailors in the demanding art of seamanship. His crew included experienced petty officers and warrant officers who served as instructors, men whose patience and knowledge would transform eager volunteers into competent sailors. The cadets themselves ranged in age from 16 to 25, drawn from across Britain and her colonies by dreams of naval adventure and secure careers in an expanding fleet. The training curriculum aboard the Atlanta emphasized practical skills that no shore-based academy could provide. Cadets learned to work aloft in all weather, setting and furling sails while the ship pitched and rolled beneath them. They studied navigation by taking sun sights and star fixes, learning to determine their position using instruments and calculations that required both mathematical precision and intuitive understanding of celestial movement. Most importantly, they absorbed the discipline and teamwork that transformed individual sailors into effective crews capable of handling any emergency the sea might present. Bermuda's position in the mid-Atlantic made it an ideal base for training voyages that combined practical seamanship with long-distance navigation. The route to Portsmouth, England covered over 3,000 miles of ocean that could present every challenge young sailors might encounter during their careers. From calm weather that tested patience to storms that demanded instant response and unwavering courage. Previous Atlanta voyages had completed this passage successfully, providing cadets with confidence and instructors with satisfaction that their students had mastered essential skills. The January departure followed standard Royal Navy procedures, with harbour officials recording the ship's manifest, destination, and estimated arrival date. Weather reports suggested favourable conditions for the Atlantic crossing, though experienced mariners knew that January storms could develop rapidly and strike with devastating force. Stirling's decision to proceed reflected his confidence in both his vessel's seaworthiness and his crew's ability to handle whatever conditions they might encounter. Initial expectations called for the Atlanta to reach Portsmouth within 3 weeks, allowing for normal Atlantic weather delays and the measured pace required for effective training. When the ship failed to appear on schedule, authorities assumed storm delays or extended training exercises had prolonged the voyage. Such variations were common in training ship operations, where educational objectives often took precedence over rigid schedules. As days stretched into weeks without communication, concern transformed into alarm. The Royal Navy dispatched vessels to search likely positions along the Atlanta's intended route, while shore stations received instructions to watch for signals or wreckage that might indicate the training ship's fate. Commercial vessels received alerts to report any sightings of a 3-masted ship matching the Atlanta's description, while coastal authorities prepared to respond to survivors who might reach shore in lifeboats. The search operation eventually covered hundreds of thousands of square miles, utilizing every available naval vessel and drawing assistance from merchant ships throughout the North Atlantic. Aircraft were not yet available for maritime search operations, forcing rescuers to rely on visual observation from ship decks that could see only to the horizon. Despite this limitation, the search continued for months, driven by hope that 281 men might somehow have survived whatever disaster had befallen their ship. No trace ever emerged, no wreckage washed ashore on European or American coasts, no lifeboats were discovered drifting in shipping lanes, no survivors reached land with stories of the Atlanta's final moments. The ship and everyone aboard had vanished as completely as if they had sailed beyond the edge of the world, leaving no evidence of their passage or fate. Weather records from the relevant period revealed several significant storms along the Atlanta's probable route, any of which could have overwhelmed a sailing vessel caught in the wrong position. The North Atlantic in winter was notorious for sudden gales that could generate waves tall enough to swamp even large ships, while freezing spray could accumulate on rigging until vessels became top-heavy and unstable. A training ship with many inexperienced hands might have been particularly vulnerable if critical sail handling operations were bungled during emergency conditions. Structural failure offered another explanation for the complete disappearance. The Atlanta's age and conversion from warship to training vessel might have created weak points that failed under extreme stress. If her hull had been compromised by decades of service, a sudden breach could have led to catastrophic flooding that overwhelmed pumping capacity and sent the ship to the bottom within minutes. The violence of such destruction might have prevented any debris from reaching the surface. Human error remained a disturbing possibility. Training ships, by definition, carried many sailors still learning their trade, men who might panic or make critical mistakes during emergency situations. If inexperienced cadets had mishandled sail operations during a storm, the resulting loss of control could have led to capsizing or structural damage that proved fatal. The concentration of inexperienced personnel aboard the Atlanta made such scenarios more likely than they would have been aboard vessels with fully trained crews. More exotic theories emerged as investigators exhausted conventional explanations. Some suggested the Atlanta had encountered a rogue wave, those solitary giants that could appear without warning and strike with enough force to destroy any vessel. Others proposed collision with an iceberg or uncharted obstacle that had holed the ship so severely that she sank before distress signals could be sent. A few even speculated about supernatural causes, though such ideas found little support among naval professionals. The Admiralty's official conclusion blamed severe weather for the Atlanta's loss, a finding that satisfied legal requirements while acknowledging the limits of maritime investigation. New regulations emerged from the tragedy, requiring improved safety equipment aboard training vessels and more conservative routing during winter months. These changes reflected lessons learned at terrible cost, though they came too late to help the 281 men who had vanished with their ship. Portsmouth Naval College established a memorial to the lost cadets, listing their names on a bronze plaque that still draws visitors seeking to understand the tragedy. Annual ceremonies honor their memory while serving as reminders of the sea's power to claim lives regardless of preparation, skill, or courage. The memorial's inscription speaks of duty, sacrifice, and the price of naval service, though it cannot explain why these particular men disappeared so completely. British naval training procedures evolved significantly following the Atlanta disaster, with greater emphasis on safety protocols and emergency procedures. Modern training ships carry multiple communication systems, emergency beacons, and life-saving equipment that would have been impossible to imagine in 1880. Yet instructors still use the Atlanta case to teach cadets about the ocean's ultimate authority over human ambitions. The mystery endures because it represents the sea's capacity to erase completely, leaving no trace for families to mourn or investigators to examine. Unlike dramatic battles or heroic last stands, the Atlanta's fate offers no narrative resolution, no final moments of courage or tragedy to commemorate. She simply sailed into history and never returned, carrying 281 futures into a silence that the Atlantic has never chosen to break. The captain's morning coffee sat cold in its cup beside a navigation chart marked with yesterday's position, as if he had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. September 1884 brought the kind of discovery that transforms routine maritime encounters into enduring mysteries. The merchant vessel Hussar, making her own passage through North Atlantic shipping lanes, spotted something that violated every principle of seamanship: a fully rigged brig sailing steadily through moderate seas with no visible crew aboard. Her sails were properly set to catch the prevailing winds. Her course appeared deliberate, yet no human figure moved on her deck or responded to increasingly urgent signals from the approaching ship. The abandoned vessel bore the name Resolven painted across her stern, identifying a 130-ton merchant brig that had departed Wales weeks earlier with a crew of experienced sailors and a cargo of coal bound for Newfoundland markets. What should have been a profitable if unremarkable voyage had somehow transformed into something far more unsettling. A ship that continued sailing herself across the Atlantic while her human crew had vanished without explanation. Captain John James had commanded the Resolven when she cleared Welsh waters in August 1884, leading a small but competent crew on what promised to be a routine cargo run. The vessel herself was well suited for such work: sturdy construction, reliable rigging, adequate space for bulk cargo that formed the backbone of transatlantic commerce. Her design reflected decades of refinement in merchant ship architecture, creating vessels that could carry maximum cargo while maintaining reasonable safety margins in unpredictable ocean conditions. The coal cargo secured in her hold represented standard trade goods connecting British industrial production with North American markets. Newfoundland's growing communities required reliable fuel supplies that only efficient shipping could provide, while Welsh mines needed profitable outlets for their production. Such commerce created regular shipping routes where experienced captains like James could earn steady profits through careful navigation and prudent cargo management. James brought 30 years of maritime experience to the Resolven's command, having sailed these same routes countless times under varying weather conditions. His crew included men familiar with North Atlantic navigation, sailors who understood how quickly conditions could change and what responses were required to maintain safety. Nothing in their background suggested any reason for the tragedy that would befall them during what should have been an ordinary voyage. The Hussars' crew approached the drifting Resolven with increasing caution as their signals met with no response. Maritime protocol required ships to acknowledge each other's presence, particularly when sailing in proximity through busy shipping lanes. The complete absence of any reaction from the brig suggested either serious emergency aboard or something far more mysterious than normal mechanical difficulties. Boarding the abandoned vessel revealed a scene that defied logical explanation. Personal belongings remained exactly where their owners had left them. Clothes folded in sea chests, pipes still loaded with tobacco, personal letters tucked into various hiding places around the crew quarters. The captain's cabin showed particular attention to detail, with charts laid out for navigation planning, instruments properly secured, and personal effects arranged with the precision that marked experienced mariners. Most puzzling, the ship's cargo remained completely undisturbed. Coal still lay properly trimmed in the hold, secured against shifting that could destabilize the vessel during rough weather. No evidence suggested theft, piracy, or any attempt to remove valuable materials before abandonment. The cargo's pristine condition ruled out many theories that might otherwise explain the crew's disappearance. The ship's logbook provided tantalizing but ultimately unhelpful information. Recent entries recorded normal maritime routine, position fixes, weather observations, sail adjustments required by changing wind conditions. Nothing suggested distress, unusual circumstances, or growing concerns that might have prompted emergency evacuation. The final entry, made in Captain James's careful handwriting, documented routine morning observations with no indication that disaster was imminent. Only 2 items were missing from the otherwise complete scene: the ship's lifeboat and every member of her crew. The lifeboat's absence indicated deliberate departure rather than sudden catastrophe that might have swept the crew overboard. Someone had taken time to launch the boat properly, suggesting organized evacuation rather than panic-driven flight from immediate danger. Weather records from the relevant period showed no major storms along the Resolven's probable route, though Atlantic conditions could change rapidly without warning. Experienced sailors would have recognized approaching weather systems and taken appropriate precautions, making it unlikely that sudden storms had caught them unprepared. The ship's good condition further argued against weather-related abandonment. Navigation errors provided another possibility for the mystery. If the Resolven had become lost or threatened with grounding on uncharted obstacles, the crew might have abandoned ship preemptively while launching the lifeboat to seek safety. But James's experience and the presence of proper navigation equipment made such errors unlikely, particularly given the well-traveled nature of the Wales to Newfoundland route. Medical emergency offered a more plausible explanation. If disease had struck the crew, they might have abandoned ship to prevent spread of contagion or to seek medical attention ashore. The missing lifeboat could have carried sick crew members toward land while leaving the vessel to drift unmanned. However, no reports of unidentified sick sailors reaching shore ever emerged from coastal communities along possible approach routes. More sinister theories focused on piracy or violence among the crew themselves. Mutiny aboard merchant vessels was not unknown, particularly when disputes arose over pay, working conditions, or command decisions. If the crew had rebelled against Captain James, they might have forced him and loyal crew members into the lifeboat before taking control of the ship. But such scenarios typically involve theft of cargo or ship seizure, neither of which occurred in the Resolven's case. External attack by pirates remained possible despite the complete absence of evidence. Sophisticated pirates might have captured the crew while leaving the ship and cargo intact, perhaps planning to return later for salvage operations. The North Atlantic's busy shipping lanes offered opportunities for such activities, though piracy had become increasingly rare by the 1880s due to improved naval patrols and international cooperation against sea raiders. Supernatural explanations inevitably emerged as rational theories failed to account for all aspects of the mystery. Maritime folklore included countless tales of cursed ships, ghostly interventions, and mysterious forces that could lure crews to their doom. Local legends spoke of sea spirits that could entrance entire crews, leading them to abandon perfectly seaworthy vessels for reasons no living person could understand. More exotic theories suggested encounters with sea monsters or other unknown maritime phenomena. Sailors of the era regularly reported strange sightings, giant squids, unusual weather formations, unidentified vessels that appeared and vanished without explanation. While such accounts rarely found official credence, they reflected the reality that vast ocean areas remained unexplored and poorly understood. The discovery sparked extensive investigation by maritime authorities concerned about both the human tragedy and the implications for commercial shipping safety. If experienced crews could vanish without trace from seaworthy vessels, what protection existed for other ships following the same routes? Insurance companies demanded explanations that investigators could not provide, leading to increased scrutiny of vessel design, crew training, and emergency procedures. Families of the missing crew pressed for answers that never came. 7 men had simply vanished from a functional ship under conditions that offered no clear explanation for their fate. Wives and children waited for news that never arrived, while official investigations eventually concluded with the unsatisfying finding that the crew's fate remained unknown. The Resolven herself was eventually returned to commercial service after extensive inspection revealed no structural defects or hidden dangers that might have prompted abandonment. New owners reportedly experienced difficulty recruiting crews as sailors whispered about the cursed brig that had lost her original crew under mysterious circumstances. Such superstitions reflected deeper fears about ocean travel and the possibility that some mysteries might never yield to rational explanation. Welsh maritime records preserve the Resolven case as an example of the sea's capacity for inexplicable tragedy. Local museums display artifacts related to the mystery, while maritime historians continue debating theories that might explain how an entire crew could vanish from a perfectly functional vessel. The case serves as a reminder that despite advances in navigation, communication, and ship design, the ocean retains power to confound human understanding. Today, the Resolven endures in maritime folklore as the ship that sailed herself home while carrying only ghosts. Her story resonates because it touches fundamental fears about isolation, abandonment, and the thin line between safety and disaster that marks all ocean travel. The radio operator's final transmission crackled across the Atlantic with words that no maritime manual had ever taught him to send. "Danger like a dagger now. Come quick." April 21st, 1925. Marked the moment when routine commercial shipping encountered something beyond the vocabulary of ordinary maritime distress. The MV Raifuku Maru, a Japanese freighter carrying wheat from Boston to Hamburg, had been maintaining normal radio contact throughout her Atlantic crossing when suddenly her communications officer broadcast a message that would haunt maritime investigators for decades. The poetic desperation of those words, "danger like a dagger," suggested a crew witnessing something so immediate and inexplicable that conventional distress terminology proved inadequate. The Raifuku Maru represented the expanding maritime trade that connected post-World War I economies across ocean distances. Built in the early 1920s during Japan's industrial modernization, she embodied the sturdy pragmatism required for profitable grain transport. At 420 feet long, with reinforced holds designed for bulk cargo, she could carry thousands of tons of wheat across Atlantic shipping lanes that connected American agricultural production with European markets, hungry for reliable food supplies. Captain Isuke Tachibana commanded the vessel, with the experience that came from years navigating both Pacific and Atlantic routes. His crew included men familiar with the seasonal patterns and weather challenges that marked successful ocean commerce. The ship herself carried modern equipment for her era, radio communication systems that allowed regular contact with shore stations, navigation instruments that promised accurate position finding, steam engines powerful enough to maintain schedule even in adverse conditions. The cargo manifest recorded 5,000 tons of American wheat, properly loaded and secured for the transatlantic passage. Such shipments represented essential commerce connecting continents. American farmers needed international markets for their surplus production, while European millers required reliable grain supplies for their growing urban populations. The Raifuku Maru's route had been traveled safely by hundreds of similar vessels, following established shipping lanes that promised both efficiency and reasonable safety margins. Weather forecasts at departure had suggested favorable conditions for the Atlantic crossing, though experienced mariners understood that April weather could change rapidly as winter patterns gave way to spring storms. The ship's radio equipment allowed regular communication with shore stations and passing vessels, providing weather updates and position reports that helped ensure safe navigation through increasingly busy shipping lanes. Initial radio contacts followed standard commercial shipping protocols. Position reports arrived on schedule, mechanical systems seemed to be functioning normally, and crew morale appeared good based on the routine nature of their transmissions. Nothing in the early communication suggested any reason for concern about the voyage's progress or the ship's condition. The transformation from routine voyage to maritime mystery occurred within minutes on that April morning. Nearby vessels, including the steamship SS Noronic, were monitoring standard shipping frequencies when the Raifuku Maru's radio operator began transmitting his desperate plea. The language itself was unprecedented. No maritime emergency manual contained phrases like "danger like a dagger," yet the urgency in the transmission was unmistakable. The SS Noronic immediately altered course toward the Raifuku Maru's last known position, while other vessels in the area responded to the distress call with similar urgency. Standard maritime protocol required ships to assist vessels in distress, and the unusual nature of the emergency transmission only heightened concern among rescuers racing toward the reported position. When rescue vessels reached the coordinates, they encountered empty ocean. No trace of the Raifuku Maru remained visible, no floating debris, no lifeboats, no oil slicks that might indicate where a ship had gone down. The absence of any wreckage puzzled experienced mariners who understood that even catastrophic sinkings typically left some evidence floating on the surface. Extended search operations covered hundreds of square miles around the ship's last known position, with multiple vessels scanning the horizon for any sign of survivors or wreckage. Aircraft were not yet commonly available for maritime search operations, forcing rescuers to rely on visual observation from ship decks that could see only to the horizon. Despite these limitations, the search continued for days as crews hoped to locate lifeboats or survivors who might have escaped whatever disaster had claimed their ship. The search yielded nothing. No wreckage ever surfaced. No survivors reached shore with accounts of the Raifuku Maru's final moments. No floating debris provided clues about what had destroyed a modern freighter so completely that it left no trace. The ship and her crew of 42 had vanished as thoroughly as if they had sailed beyond the edge of the known world. The mysterious final transmission became the focus of intense speculation among maritime investigators and shipping industry officials. Professional radio operators typically used standardized emergency language designed for clarity and precision during crisis situations. Terms like Mayday, SOS, and specific descriptions of mechanical problems, weather conditions, or navigational hazards allowed rescue coordinators to understand emergencies quickly and respond appropriately. Danger, like a dagger now, fell outside any established emergency communication protocol. The phrase suggested something immediate and threatening, yet its poetic quality indicated the radio operator was struggling to describe something beyond normal maritime experience. Maritime historians noted that experienced sailors typically remained calm during emergencies, using precise language to communicate their situations to potential rescuers. The unusual transmission suggested several possibilities. If the ship had encountered a massive rogue wave, those solitary giants that could appear without warning, the sudden appearance of such a phenomenon might have prompted language reflecting its shocking, knife-like approach. Scientific understanding of rogue waves was limited in 1925, though sailors had reported encounters with unexpectedly large waves throughout maritime history. Underwater explosions provided another explanation for both the cryptic language and the ship's complete disappearance. If the Raifuku Maru had encountered a drifting mine left over from World War I, or if her cargo had somehow ignited, the resulting explosion might have destroyed the vessel so completely that no debris remained. The dagger reference could have described the sudden, piercing nature of an explosion that gave the crew only seconds to react. More exotic theories focused on the ship's location when she vanished. The coordinates placed her near what would later be called the Bermuda Triangle, a region that gained notoriety for unexplained disappearances of ships and aircraft. While the Raifuku Maru technically disappeared north of the triangle's commonly accepted boundaries, believers in supernatural explanations saw her case as evidence of mysterious forces operating in Atlantic waters. Weather-related explanations remain plausible despite the favorable forecast at departure. Atlantic weather systems could develop rapidly, creating sudden squalls or microbursts that might overwhelm even well-built vessels. If the Raifuku Maru had encountered such conditions, the crew might have had only moments to send a distress call before their ship capsized or was driven under by massive waves. The complete absence of wreckage troubled investigators familiar with typical maritime disasters. Even ships destroyed by explosions or catastrophic weather usually left some floating debris, life preservers, wooden materials, oil slicks from ruptured fuel tanks. The Raifuku Maru's total disappearance suggested either destruction so complete that no materials reached the surface, or sinking in waters so deep that wreckage never floated back up. Captain Tachibana's experience and the ship's modern equipment made human error less likely as an explanation. The crew had completed similar voyages successfully, navigating well-traveled shipping lanes with reliable instruments and communication systems. The routine nature of the voyage up until the final transmission suggested no ongoing problems that might have led to disaster. Maritime insurance companies faced unprecedented challenges in processing claims related to the Raifuku Maru's disappearance. Without wreckage or witnesses to establish the cause of loss, investigators could only speculate about what had destroyed the vessel. The unusual final transmission became a key piece of evidence, though its meaning remained frustratingly unclear to legal and technical experts. Japanese shipping companies implemented new communication protocols following the incident, requiring more frequent position reports and encouraging radio operators to use standardized emergency language even during unusual situations. These changes reflected industry-wide concern about the implications of the Raifuku Maru case for commercial shipping safety. The story gained renewed attention during the 1960s and 1970s as public interest in Bermuda Triangle mysteries increased. Authors and researchers cited the Raifuku Maru as evidence of supernatural forces operating in Atlantic waters, though skeptics noted the lack of verifiable details and the tendency for such stories to grow in the telling. Maritime radio operators still study the Raifuku Maru case as an example of how emergency communications can become confused during extreme stress. Training programs emphasize the importance of clear, standardized language even when describing unprecedented situations. The case serves as a reminder that unusual circumstances can challenge even experienced professionals. Modern oceanographic research has confirmed the existence of rogue waves and other extreme weather phenomena that were poorly understood in 1925. Advanced satellite monitoring and wave prediction models now provide warnings that might have helped the Raifuku Maru avoid whatever fate befell her. Yet, the specific cause of her disappearance remains as mysterious today as it was nearly a century ago. The Raifuku Maru endures in maritime folklore partly because her final message captured something beyond routine disaster. The poetic desperation of danger like a dagger now suggests a crew confronting something so unprecedented that normal language failed them. Whether that something was a massive wave, an explosion, or some other force, it struck with violence so sudden and complete that 42 lives disappeared into silence. Her story reminds us that the ocean holds powers we are still learning to understand, forces that can transform routine voyages into inexplicable tragedies. The Raifuku Maru's voice from the abyss continues to echo across the decades, a ghostly transmission that speaks to our deepest fears about the sea's capacity for sudden, inexplicable violence that leaves no witnesses to tell the tale. Empty lifeboats drifted toward Newfoundland shores like ghost messengers, carrying the Noronic's name, but none of her secrets. March 1893 brought discoveries that transformed a missing ship into one of maritime history's most haunting mysteries. Fishermen working the Grand Banks encountered weather-beaten lifeboats bearing the name of a vessel that had vanished weeks earlier into the North Atlantic's frozen vastness. These silent witnesses told only part of the story. They confirmed that the SS Noronic's crew had abandoned their ship, but offered no explanation for why 74 experienced sailors had chosen the desperate gamble of lifeboats over the relative safety of their ironclad steamship. The Noronic represented the pinnacle of late Victorian maritime engineering, built by Harland and Wolff in 1892 during an era when steam power promised to conquer the ancient uncertainties of ocean travel. At 470 feet long, with elegant passenger accommodations and spacious cargo holds, she embodied the confidence of an age that believed technology could tame the sea's wildest moods. Her builders had crafted her with ironclad hull plating, powerful steam engines, and all the safety features that Victorian engineering could provide. The shipyard that created the Noronic would later gain immortal fame for launching the Titanic, but in 1892 their reputation rested on vessels like the Noronic, reliable steamships that connected continents with unprecedented regularity and safety. Her design reflected the accumulated wisdom of decades of steam navigation, incorporating lessons learned from earlier vessels while pushing the boundaries of what maritime technology could achieve. Captain William Thompson commanded the Noronic when she departed Liverpool on February 11, 1893, leading a crew of experienced sailors toward what should have been a profitable cargo run to New York. The ship's manifest recorded diverse cargo, including live cattle, manufactured goods, and general freight that represented the growing commercial ties between Britain and America. Such voyages formed the backbone of transatlantic commerce, carrying the products and people that connected industrial economies across ocean distances. Weather conditions at departure appeared favorable for the Atlantic crossing, though experienced mariners understood that February storms could develop rapidly in northern waters. The Noronic's steam engines promised independence from wind patterns that had constrained sailing vessels for centuries, while her modern construction suggested she could handle whatever weather the Atlantic might present during the winter crossing season. The ship's passenger accommodations reflected the dual nature of steamship travel in the 1890s: comfortable cabins for those who could afford them, basic steerage for emigrants seeking new lives in America. While primarily a cargo vessel, the Noronic carried enough passengers to make her disappearance a human tragedy as well as a commercial loss. Families on both sides of the Atlantic waited for news that would never come. Initial communications followed standard patterns for steamship operations of the era. The Noronic maintained scheduled contact with shore stations during her early days at sea, reporting position and weather conditions according to established protocols. Nothing in these transmissions suggested mechanical problems, unusual weather encounters, or crew difficulties that might have foreshadowed the tragedy to come. The transformation from routine voyage to maritime mystery occurred somewhere in the vast expanse between Europe and America, in waters where ships could disappear completely without witnesses to record their final moments. When the Noronic failed to arrive in New York on schedule, port authorities initially assumed weather delays had extended the voyage. February storms in the North Atlantic frequently forced ships to seek shelter or reduce speed, making delays common enough to cause minimal concern. As days stretched into weeks without word, concern escalated into alarm among shipping company officials and family members waiting for passengers and crew. The absence of any communication from a steamship equipped with modern signaling capabilities suggested something more serious than routine delays. Search efforts began, though the vast North Atlantic offered countless areas where a disabled vessel might drift beyond the reach of rescue operations. The discovery of the empty lifeboats provided the first concrete evidence of disaster, though they raised more questions than they answered. Maritime investigators examining the recovered boats found them in remarkably good condition considering their exposure to North Atlantic weather conditions. The boats showed signs of proper launching procedures, suggesting the crew had time to deploy them according to established emergency protocols rather than abandoning ship in panic. More mysteriously, personal effects and supplies that crews typically carried in emergency evacuations were notably absent from the recovered lifeboats. If the crew had abandoned the Noronic due to immediate danger like fire or explosion, they might have launched boats without proper provisioning. But if they had time to deploy boats correctly, why hadn't they loaded survival supplies that might have sustained them during the journey to shore? Then came the messages in bottles, handwritten notes that began washing ashore along various points of the North American coast in the weeks following the Noronic's disappearance. These messages claimed to be final communications from crew members describing encounters with icebergs, mechanical failures, and desperate final moments aboard the doomed vessel. The messages captured public imagination, providing dramatic details about the ship's final hours that satisfied Victorian appetite for maritime tragedy. One bottle contained a note allegedly written by crew member John Olson describing the ship's collision with an iceberg and subsequent rapid flooding. The message painted a vivid picture of chaos aboard the sinking vessel, with crew members struggling to launch lifeboats while the Noronic settled deeper into the frigid water. Another unsigned message described storm conditions that had overwhelmed the ship's capacity to maintain stability, leading to catastrophic rolling that made survival impossible. Maritime authorities approached these bottled messages with considerable skepticism. The Victorian era had witnessed numerous hoax messages related to famous disasters created by individuals seeking attention or attempting to profit from public fascination with maritime tragedy. The language and handwriting in several messages raised questions about their authenticity, while the convenient timing of their discoveries suggested possible fabrication. Professional investigators noted that genuine final messages from sinking ships typically contained specific details about the vessel's condition, crew actions, and environmental factors that could be verified against known information about the ship and its voyage. The bottled messages from the Noronic contained dramatic descriptions but lacked the technical specificity that would be expected from experienced mariners facing emergency conditions. Despite skepticism about the messages, the theory of iceberg collision remained plausible given the Noronic's route and the seasonal presence of ice in North Atlantic shipping lanes. February marked the height of iceberg season when Arctic ice drifted south into shipping routes that connected Europe with North American ports. Even glancing contact with an iceberg could damage a ship's hull severely enough to cause fatal flooding. The Noronic's modern construction included compartmentalized design intended to prevent single hull breaches from sinking the entire vessel, but catastrophic damage from iceberg impact could overwhelm such safety features. If the collision had occurred at night during poor visibility conditions, the crew might have had only minutes to launch lifeboats before their ship became uninhabitable. Mechanical failure offered another explanation for the disaster. Steam technology in the 1890s remained relatively new, with boiler explosions and engine malfunctions representing constant threats to steamship operations. The Noronic's powerful engines generated tremendous pressures that could prove fatal if safety systems failed. An explosion in the engine room could have caused rapid flooding while simultaneously destroying the ship's electrical systems and preventing distress communications. Weather-related theories focused on the North Atlantic's capacity for generating sudden, violent storms that could overwhelm even well-built vessels. Rogue waves, those solitary giants that appeared without warning, were documented phenomena that could strike ships with enough force to cause immediate structural failure. If the Noronic had encountered such conditions, her crew might have abandoned ship believing their vessel was about to break apart or capsize. The complete absence of confirmed wreckage remained the most puzzling aspect of the Noronic mystery. Even ships destroyed by explosions or extreme weather typically left some floating debris that eventually washed ashore or was recovered by passing vessels. The North Atlantic's busy shipping lanes made it likely that any substantial wreckage would have been spotted and reported by other vessels following similar routes. Insurance investigations into the Noronic's loss revealed the challenges of maritime disaster assessment in an era before radio communication and systematic search and rescue operations. Without survivors or witnesses, investigators could only speculate about the sequence of events that had led to the ship's disappearance. The recovered lifeboats provided evidence of evacuation, but no information about what had prompted the crew to abandon their vessel. British maritime authorities used the Noronic case to justify improvements in steamship safety regulations, including enhanced watertight compartment design and improved emergency equipment requirements. These changes reflected growing understanding of the risks inherent in steam navigation, though they came too late to help the 74 souls who had vanished with their ship. The Noronic story gradually faded from public memory as newer maritime disasters captured attention, but maritime historians preserved her case as an example of the North Atlantic's capacity for complete erasure. Unlike more famous disasters that left survivors to tell their stories, the Noronic disappeared so thoroughly that only speculation and empty lifeboats remained to mark her passage. Liverpool maritime museums maintain exhibits related to the Noronic mystery, displaying artifacts from the era and documenting the various theories that have emerged over the decades. The case serves as a reminder of the transition period between sail and steam, when new technologies promised greater safety but could not eliminate the fundamental dangers of ocean travel. Modern shipping routes still follow paths similar to the Noronic's intended course, though satellite communication and weather forecasting now provide warnings that were unavailable in 1893. Contemporary vessels carry emergency beacons and life-saving equipment that would have been impossible to imagine during the steamship era. Yet the North Atlantic continues to challenge human efforts to master its moods. The empty lifeboats remain the Noronic's most haunting legacy, evidence of human decision-making in the face of mortal danger. Whatever drove 74 people to abandon a modern steamship for the desperate gamble of lifeboats in February seas, it must have seemed preferable to remaining aboard their vessel. The tow line snapped with a sound like thunder, leaving 4,250 tons of Soviet-era cruise ship to drift wherever the North Atlantic currents might carry her. January 2013 marked the moment when maritime disposal became maritime mystery. The MV Lyubov Orlova, named after a celebrated Russian actress, had been under tow from Newfoundland toward Dominican Republic scrapyards when harsh winter conditions severed her connection to civilization. What should have been the final chapter in a cruise ship's decline instead became the opening scene of one of the 21st century's strangest ghost ship tales. The vessel herself carried decades of history within her rusting hull. Built in 1976, during the height of Soviet maritime ambition, she had been designed specifically for Arctic expedition cruising, a luxury few ships could claim. Her reinforced construction allowed navigation through ice-filled waters where conventional cruise ships feared to venture, carrying passengers to witness polar bears, glacial formations, and the raw beauty of Earth's most remote regions. For over 3 decades, the Lyubov Orlova had fulfilled her purpose admirably. Passengers remembered her comfortable accommodations, her skilled crews who navigated treacherous ice channels, and the unforgettable experiences she provided in Arctic waters that remained inaccessible to most travelers. But time proved unkind to Soviet-era construction, and by the early 2000s, mounting maintenance costs and changing safety regulations had rendered her commercially unviable. The ship's final years painted a melancholy picture of maritime decline. Abandoned in a St. John's harbour, she became a familiar sight to local residents, a massive hulk slowly rusting away while legal battles raged over unpaid debts and ownership disputes. Her once elegant interiors deteriorated from exposure, while Canadian authorities grew increasingly concerned about environmental hazards posed by a decaying vessel in their waters. The decision to scrap the Lyubov Orlova reflected both practical necessity and environmental responsibility. Dominican Republic facilities offered cost-effective shipbreaking services, while removing the vessel from Canadian waters would eliminate ongoing liability concerns. The 2013 towing operation began routinely enough, with proper preparations for the challenging North Atlantic crossing that lay ahead. Winter conditions in the North Atlantic test even the most carefully planned maritime operations. The towing vessel encountered severe weather that placed enormous stress on equipment designed for calmer conditions. When the tow line parted, the Lyubov Orlova became instantly transformed from controlled cargo into drifting hazard, subject to winds and currents that would determine her fate without human intervention. Canadian authorities faced an immediate dilemma. The abandoned cruise ship posed potential threats to navigation, fishing operations, and coastal communities throughout the North Atlantic region. Initial efforts to recapture the vessel succeeded temporarily, but when the tow line broke again, officials made the controversial decision to let her drift into international waters rather than risk further expensive and dangerous recovery attempts. The legal implications of this decision created unprecedented maritime law questions. Who bore responsibility for a ship deliberately abandoned in international waters? What obligations existed to warn other vessels about a drifting hazard? How could authorities track a vessel that possessed no functioning navigation or communication equipment? The Lyubov Orlova had become a ghost ship in the most literal sense, unmanned, uncontrolled, and legally invisible. Reports of possible sightings began almost immediately. Commercial fishing vessels reported radar contacts matching the cruise ship's profile, though visual confirmation proved elusive in North Atlantic weather conditions. Merchant ships occasionally spotted distant vessels that might have been the Lyubov Orlova, but rough seas and poor visibility prevented definitive identification. Each unconfirmed sighting added to the growing legend of a ship that refused to sink. The most disturbing theory about the vessel's condition involved its potential inhabitants. Rats commonly infest ships, and the Lyubov Orlova had likely harbored substantial rodent populations during her years of abandonment. Trapped aboard a drifting vessel with no food sources, these animals would have faced desperate conditions that could lead to cannibalistic behavior, creating what media sensationally dubbed a cannibal rat ghost ship, drifting through busy shipping lanes. Marine biologists noted that such scenarios, while gruesome, were biologically plausible. Rat populations trapped without food sources would indeed resort to cannibalism, potentially reducing their numbers to sustainable levels if alternative food sources became available. The ship's construction materials, insulation, and accumulated organic matter might provide enough sustenance to maintain small populations for extended periods. The vessel's potential longevity surprised maritime experts familiar with ship construction and ocean conditions. Modern cruise ships incorporate multiple watertight compartments and buoyant materials that can keep vessels afloat even when significantly damaged. The Lyubov Orlova's Soviet-era construction emphasized durability over weight considerations, creating a hull that might remain buoyant for years despite deteriorating conditions. Ocean current models suggested various possible drift patterns for the abandoned cruise ship. Gulf Stream currents could carry her northeast toward European waters, while other patterns might direct her toward African coasts or back toward North American shores. Weather conditions would influence these patterns unpredictably, making long-term position forecasting virtually impossible without active tracking. International shipping organizations issued warnings about the potential hazard posed by a drifting cruise ship in busy North Atlantic shipping lanes. The vessel's size made collision potentially catastrophic for smaller ships, while her unpredictable movement patterns complicated navigation planning for commercial traffic. Lloyd's of London added the Lyubov Orlova to their hazard bulletins, though tracking her location remained impossible. Aviation authorities faced similar challenges as commercial aircraft pilots occasionally reported sighting unidentified vessels during transatlantic flights. Some of these reports described ships matching the Lyubov Orlova's profile, but the altitude and speed of aircraft observations made positive identification difficult. Weather conditions and ocean lighting could easily create false impressions of vessel identity and condition. Insurance companies struggled with unique challenges posed by a deliberately abandoned vessel of unknown location. Traditional maritime insurance assumes either confirmed loss or definitive position information, but the Lyubov Orlova existed in legal limbo that defied conventional coverage models. Her status as neither confirmed, sunk, nor positively located created unprecedented claims assessment difficulties. Environmental concerns about the drifting vessel included potential fuel leaks, structural materials that might wash ashore, and the possibility of the entire hull beaching on sensitive coastal areas. International environmental organizations called for coordinated tracking efforts, though the costs and technical challenges of monitoring a single drifting vessel across ocean distances made such proposals impractical. Years passed without confirmed sightings, leading many experts to conclude that the Lyubov Orlova had finally succumbed to North Atlantic conditions. Ocean storms, structural deterioration, and normal wear from saltwater exposure would eventually compromise even the most durable hull construction. Yet the absence of confirmed wreckage or debris washing ashore kept the mystery alive. Satellite imagery analysis occasionally identified objects that might have been the missing cruise ship, but resolution limitations and changing weather conditions prevented definitive confirmation. The vast scale of ocean surveillance made tracking individual vessels extremely difficult without active transponders or regular position reporting. The Lyubov Orlova case influenced international maritime law discussions about abandoned vessel responsibility and hazard mitigation procedures. Her story highlighted gaps in existing legal frameworks for addressing ships that fall outside traditional ownership and flag state jurisdiction. Today, the former Soviet cruise ship exists primarily in maritime folklore and internet speculation. Whether she rests on the Atlantic floor or continues her ghostly drift through remote ocean areas, she has achieved a kind of immortality that her builders never intended. The Lyubov Orlova reminds us that even in our age of satellite tracking and global positioning systems, the ocean retains its power to hide secrets in plain sight. Coal dust still clung to the ship's deck rails as if the crew had been loading cargo just moments before they vanished into the morning mist. September 19, 1917, brought a discovery that would puzzle wartime investigators and fuel decades of maritime speculation. French coastal patrols encountered a British schooner drifting unmanned near Cherbourg, her sails properly set, her cargo secure, yet completely abandoned by the 5-man crew who should have been guiding her safely to port. The vessel bore the name Zebrina painted across her stern, identifying a ship that had departed Falmouth just 2 days earlier on what should have been a routine wartime supply run. The Zebrina belonged to that generation of working vessels that formed the backbone of wartime commerce, modest ships that carried essential supplies between Allied ports, while German U-boats prowled beneath the surface. Built in 1873 as a schooner barge, she measured barely 100 feet in length and possessed none of the glamour associated with passenger liners or naval warships. Her purpose was purely functional: transport coal, grain, and general cargo along established trade routes that connected British and French ports. By 1917, the English Channel had become one of the war's most dangerous waterways. German submarine commanders recognized that disrupting Allied supply lines could prove as effective as direct military engagement, leading to systematic attacks on merchant shipping that claimed hundreds of vessels throughout the conflict. The Zebrina's modest size and unremarkable cargo should have made her an unlikely target. Yet these same waters had witnessed the destruction of ships far smaller and less valuable than herself. Captain James Pike commanded the Zebrina when she cleared Falmouth Harbour on September 17, carrying a full load of coal bound for Saint-Brieuc, France. His crew included 4 experienced sailors familiar with channel navigation and the constant threats posed by submarine activity. The voyage represented routine wartime commerce, essential supplies moving between Allied ports, despite the dangers that lurked beneath seemingly peaceful waters. The planned journey should have required no more than 2 days under normal conditions, following well-established shipping routes that offered the best combination of efficiency and safety. Weather conditions appeared favorable for the crossing, though wartime navigation required constant vigilance for periscopes, torpedo wakes, or any signs of German naval activity that might threaten merchant vessels operating in contested waters. The transformation from routine cargo run to maritime mystery occurred somewhere in the 150 miles of water separating English and French coasts. When the Zebrina failed to arrive at Saint-Brieuc on schedule, port authorities initially assumed U-boat activity had delayed or diverted the vessel. Such disruptions were common enough that missed arrival times rarely triggered immediate alarm among officials accustomed to the uncertainties of wartime shipping. French coastal patrols discovered the abandoned schooner drifting approximately 10 miles northeast of Cherbourg. Her position suggesting she had completed most of her intended voyage before whatever disaster befell her crew. The ship appeared to be sailing herself, maintaining course through moderate seas with no human hand guiding her wheel or adjusting her canvas to changing wind conditions. Boarding parties found a scene that defied logical explanation within the context of known wartime threats. The Zebrina showed no battle damage, no shell holes or torpedo strikes that might indicate submarine attack. Her hull remained intact, her rigging undamaged, her cargo of coal properly secured in holds that showed no signs of flooding or explosion. Most puzzling of all, personal belongings remained exactly where the crew had left them. Pipes still loaded with tobacco, clothing folded in sea chests, food prepared but never consumed. The complete absence of the 5-man crew transformed discovery into mystery. No bodies lay hidden in cargo holds or crew quarters. No signs of violence marked the ship's surfaces. No bloodstains or evidence of struggle suggested the crew had been forced to leave against their will. The ship's lifeboat was missing, indicating deliberate departure rather than sudden catastrophe that might have swept the men overboard. German U-boat commanders did occasionally capture merchant crews rather than simply sinking their vessels, particularly early in the war when international law still influenced submarine warfare tactics. Such encounters typically involved surfacing near merchant ships, ordering crews to abandon their vessels, then either taking prisoners or allowing sailors to escape in lifeboats before destroying the now empty ships. The Zebrina's pristine condition argued against standard U-boat procedure. Submarine commanders who bothered to board merchant vessels typically either sank them to prevent continued use or stripped them of valuable materials before allowing them to drift. The complete preservation of cargo, equipment, and personal effects suggested no German intervention had occurred, leaving investigators to seek alternative explanations. Weather-related theories focused on the possibility of sudden panic caused by mistaken submarine sightings or false alarm conditions. If the crew had believed they were under attack, they might have abandoned ship preemptively, launching their lifeboat in hopes of reaching safety before their vessel was destroyed. The busy channel waters offered reasonable prospects for rescue, making such decisions understandable even if ultimately unnecessary. But no reports of missing lifeboats or stranded sailors ever emerged from channel patrol activities. British and French naval forces maintained extensive rescue operations throughout the region, and any survivors would likely have been spotted and assisted within hours of abandoning their ship. The complete absence of the Zebrina's crew suggested they had encountered some fate that prevented them from reaching safety or calling for help. Medical theories proposed sudden illness or toxic exposure that might have killed the entire crew before they could send distress signals. Coal cargo occasionally generated dangerous gases in enclosed spaces, potentially creating lethal conditions that could overcome sailors without warning. If such poisoning had occurred, the crew might have succumbed quickly while their ship continued sailing on autopilot, until discovered by patrol vessels. More exotic explanations involved encounters with experimental German weapons or secret military operations that required elimination of witnesses. The war had seen development of chemical weapons, new explosive devices, and unconventional tactics that might have targeted the Zebrina for reasons beyond normal commercial shipping concerns. However, no evidence supported such theories, and official German records contained no references to operations involving British schooners in the relevant area. The mystery deepened when investigators realized that the Zebrina's discovery occurred during daylight hours in relatively clear weather, yet no other vessels reported seeing her crew abandon ship or observing any unusual activity around the schooner. The busy channel shipping lanes made it highly unlikely that 5 men launching a lifeboat would go completely unnoticed by passing traffic. British Admiralty investigators conducted extensive interviews with U-boat commanders captured later in the war, but none admitted to encounters with the Zebrina or provided information that might explain the crew's disappearance. German naval records, when they became available after the armistice, contained no references to operations involving British schooners matching the Zebrina's description during the relevant time frame. The abandoned schooner was eventually towed to port and returned to commercial service after thorough inspection revealed no structural defects or hidden dangers that might have prompted evacuation. New crews were recruited, though many sailors expressed reluctance to serve aboard a vessel associated with such mysterious circumstances. Superstitions about cursed ships remained strong among maritime workers, even during wartime when such concerns might have seemed trivial compared to submarine threats. War profiteers eventually purchased the Zebrina at reduced prices, recognizing that her reputation for supernatural associations depressed her market value despite her sound construction and proven seaworthiness. She continued carrying cargo for several more years before changing hands multiple times as owners sought to profit from her services, while distancing themselves from her mysterious history. The vessel's final commercial voyage occurred in the 1920s, after which she was converted to serve as a houseboat moored along English rivers. Her maritime career had ended, but her legend persisted among sailors who told stories of the ship found sailing herself while her crew vanished into thin air. Local river communities grew accustomed to the converted schooner's presence, though some residents reported strange sounds or unexplained lights around the vessel during foggy nights. By the late 1930s, the Zebrina had deteriorated beyond practical use, her hull slowly rotting along muddy riverbanks where she awaited final disposal. Yet her story continued circulating in maritime folklore, preserved in official naval records and private memoirs of those who had witnessed her discovery or investigated her crew's fate. The Zebrina case represents one of World War I's most enduring maritime mysteries, a reminder that even during humanity's most documented conflicts, the sea retained power to create puzzles that defied rational explanation. Her 5 missing crew members joined the war's countless casualties, though their fate remained uniquely mysterious among the millions who perished during those devastating years. The schooner's story endures because it touches fundamental fears about the ocean's capacity for inexplicable tragedy, particularly during times when rational explanations seem most necessary for maintaining sanity and morale. She sailed into legend not through dramatic battle or heroic sacrifice, but through the simple, terrifying fact that 5 men vanished completely while their ship continued sailing as if nothing had happened at all. Static-laden voices speaking in Dutch crackled across Pacific radio frequencies, their desperate words dissolving into atmospheric interference before anyone could decode their meaning. Early 1941 brought reports of strange transmissions echoing across the Pacific theater, where World War II had transformed peaceful shipping lanes into battlegrounds stalked by submarines and surface raiders. Radio operators aboard Allied vessels occasionally intercepted fragmented distress calls that seemed to originate from nowhere. Brief bursts of panicked communication that mentioned a Dutch steamship before fading into electronic silence. The name Bintang emerged from these garbled transmissions, identifying a vessel that would vanish so completely that even her existence would become a matter of speculation. The SS Bintang belonged to the generation of Dutch merchant vessels that had connected the sprawling colonial empire of the Netherlands East Indies with markets across the globe. Built in the early 20th century when steam power promised reliable schedules regardless of wind conditions, she had spent decades carrying rubber, tin, spices and manufactured goods between Southeast Asian ports and European destinations. Her modest size and utilitarian design reflected the practical needs of colonial commerce rather than passenger luxury. By 1941, the vessel had accumulated nearly 4 decades of service records that documented routine voyages across the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Her Dutch crew included men familiar with monsoon patterns, tropical navigation challenges, and the complex logistics of colonial trade. Captain Henrik van der Berg commanded the ship with experience gained from years navigating waters that were becoming increasingly dangerous as global conflicts spread across the Pacific region. The cargo manifest for her final voyage remained classified under wartime security protocols, though surviving fragments suggest a mixed load that included natural rubber and tin ore, materials essential for Allied military production. Some intelligence documents hint at more sensitive cargo, possibly including strategic materials or classified equipment that Dutch colonial authorities were evacuating ahead of expected Japanese advances in Southeast Asia. The transformation of peaceful shipping lanes into combat zones had created unprecedented dangers for merchant vessels operating in Pacific waters. Japanese submarines were extending their patrol areas aggressively, while surface raiders disguised as neutral merchant ships posed threats that were difficult to detect until too late. Even waters previously considered safe could harbor mines, debris from naval battles, or the explosive aftermath of underwater combat. Departure records from Batavia, modern Jakarta, confirm that the Bintang cleared port in early 1941, though her intended destination remains unclear due to wartime censorship and the subsequent destruction of Dutch colonial archives. The vessel was reportedly bound for Allied ports, possibly in Australia or India, following shipping routes that had connected Dutch colonial territories with broader imperial networks for centuries. Initial radio contacts followed standard commercial protocols, with the ship reporting position and weather conditions according to established schedules. Nothing in these early transmissions suggested mechanical problems, crew difficulties, or awareness of immediate threats that might endanger the voyage. The routine nature of her communications made the subsequent silence all the more puzzling when investigators attempted to reconstruct her final days. The transformation from normal voyage to maritime mystery occurred somewhere in the vast expanse between Southeast Asia and her intended destination. When scheduled radio contacts ceased abruptly, colonial authorities initially assumed atmospheric interference or equipment failure had disrupted communications temporarily. Such problems were common enough in tropical waters that missed transmissions rarely triggered immediate concern. As days passed without contact, worry escalated among shipping company officials and family members awaiting the Bintang's arrival. The Pacific theater's rapidly changing military situation meant that ships could be diverted, delayed, or forced to seek shelter in unexpected ports. But the complete absence of any communication suggested something more serious than routine operational changes. The fragmented radio transmissions that followed created more confusion than clarity. Various Allied vessels reported intercepting brief distress calls that mentioned Dutch shipping, mechanical failures, or requests for assistance. But atmospheric conditions, equipment limitations, and the chaos of wartime communications made these reports difficult to verify or coordinate into coherent intelligence about specific vessels in distress. One transmission, intercepted by an Australian coastal station, reportedly included references to flooding, engine failure, and abandoning ship. The voice was identified as speaking Dutch, though heavy static made most words unintelligible. By the time radio operators had alerted rescue coordination centers, the transmission had ended, and repeated attempts to re-establish contact failed completely. Japanese submarine activity in the relevant area during early 1941 provided the most obvious explanation for the Bintang's disappearance. Enemy submarines were known to attack merchant vessels without warning, particularly ships carrying strategic materials that supported Allied war efforts. A successful torpedo attack could sink a cargo vessel so quickly that distress signals might be interrupted before rescue coordinates could be transmitted. Sabotage offered another wartime explanation. Japanese intelligence networks had infiltrated colonial territories throughout Southeast Asia, and the possibility of enemy agents aboard Dutch merchant ships could not be dismissed. Internal explosions, navigation sabotage, or crew betrayal might explain both the ship's disappearance and the fragmented nature of her final communications. More exotic theories focused on experimental weapons or secret military operations that required elimination of witnesses. World War II saw development of new explosive devices, underwater weapons, and unconventional tactics that might have targeted merchant shipping for reasons beyond normal strategic considerations. The classified nature of the Bintang's cargo added credibility to theories involving deliberate destruction to prevent sensitive materials from falling into enemy hands. The single piece of physical evidence discovered years later, a fragment of hull plating bearing Dutch maritime markings, was found floating near the Australian coast, thousands of miles from the ship's intended route. Naval experts who examined the debris confirmed its apparent Dutch origin, though definitive identification as Bintang wreckage proved impossible given the deteriorated condition and lack of unique identifying features. The metal fragment's location raised additional questions about the vessel's final course. If the debris had indeed come from the Bintang, her destruction must have occurred much farther south than originally assumed, suggesting either navigational errors, deliberate course changes, or drift patterns that carried wreckage far from the actual sinking site. Wartime intelligence agencies investigated the Bintang case as part of broader efforts to understand Japanese submarine capabilities and patrol patterns. The ship's disappearance, if confirmed as enemy action, would provide valuable information about the extent of Japanese naval operations and the effectiveness of their anti-shipping campaigns in previously secure waters. Dutch government-in-exile officials pressed for continued investigation of their missing merchant fleet, recognizing that vessels like the Bintang represented not only commercial losses, but also the systematic destruction of colonial economic infrastructure. Insurance claims related to wartime vessel losses created legal precedents that would influence post-war reconstruction efforts. The accounts of mysterious radio transmissions continued throughout the war, with radio operators occasionally reporting intercepted signals that seemed to originate from vessels that no longer officially existed. These ghost signals, speaking in various languages including Dutch, English, and unidentified dialects, became part of Pacific theater folklore among communications personnel who worked long shifts monitoring emergency frequencies. Post-war efforts to compile comprehensive records of merchant vessel losses included the Bintang among hundreds of ships that had simply vanished during the conflict. The scale of maritime destruction during World War II was so enormous that individual cases often received limited investigation unless they involved major passenger casualties or strategic military implications. Maritime historians studying Dutch colonial shipping records have preserved the Bintang case as an example of how wartime conditions could erase entire vessels from historical memory. Her story illustrates the challenges faced by neutral and Allied merchant shipping during the Pacific conflict, when normal commercial operations became acts of courage in increasingly dangerous waters. Modern naval archaeology has located numerous World War II wrecks throughout the Pacific, but the Bintang's remains have never been positively identified despite decades of underwater exploration. Her final resting place, like those of hundreds of other wartime casualties, remains hidden beneath waters too vast and deep for comprehensive searching. Nowadays, the SS Bintang exists primarily in fragmentary wartime records and the memories of radio operators who heard voices calling across empty ocean. Her story reminds us that some vessels don't just sink, they dissolve into the confusion of global conflict. Thousands of tons of rice lay perfectly sorted in the hold, as if the cargo had been loaded yesterday by hands that had left no fingerprints behind. March 2006 brought an encounter that challenged every assumption about modern maritime record-keeping and vessel identification. An Australian Coast Guard patrol operating in the remote waters of the Gulf of Carpentaria spotted something that should have been impossible in an age of satellite tracking and international shipping databases: a massive cargo vessel drifting unmanned through one of the world's most isolated stretches of ocean, bearing a name that appeared in no official registry and carrying cargo that no port authority had ever recorded loading. The vessel bore the name MV Jian Seng painted in fading letters across her stern, though this identifier would prove to be as mysterious as everything else about the abandoned ship. At first glance, she appeared to be another aging cargo vessel, the kind that plied trade routes between Asian ports carrying bulk commodities and manufactured goods. Her rust-stained hull and weathered superstructure suggested years of hard service, yet something about her presence in these particular waters struck the patrol crew as fundamentally wrong. The Gulf of Carpentaria represents one of Australia's most remote maritime regions, separated from major shipping lanes by hundreds of miles of empty ocean. Commercial vessels rarely venture into these waters without specific business at Darwin or other northern Australian ports. The appearance of a large cargo ship in such isolation immediately triggered questions about her origin, destination, and the circumstances that had brought her to drift aimlessly through waters that offered no logical commercial purpose. As the Coast Guard vessel approached for closer inspection, the eerie nature of the discovery became apparent. No smoke rose from the ship's funnel, no movement stirred on her decks, no response came to radio hails on standard commercial frequencies. The vessel appeared to be sailing herself, maintaining a steady drift with prevailing currents, while showing no signs of human guidance or control. Boarding parties found a scene that defied conventional explanations for abandoned vessels. The ship showed no signs of violent abandonment, no damage from storms, pirates, or mechanical explosions that might have forced rapid evacuation. Personal belongings were notably absent, as if the crew had never existed rather than having departed suddenly. Most puzzling of all, the ship's cargo hold contained thousands of tons of rice, properly stored and in excellent condition, representing a valuable commodity that no rational crew would abandon voluntarily. The complete absence of identifying documentation transformed mystery into enigma. Modern commercial vessels carry extensive paperwork, registration certificates, cargo manifests, crew lists, maintenance records, insurance documents, yet the Jian Seng possessed none of these essential items. Her radio equipment functioned normally, but tuning revealed no preset frequencies that might indicate her usual ports of call. Navigation equipment showed no programmed waypoints or route information that could suggest her intended destination. Australian maritime authorities launched comprehensive investigations that revealed the impossibility of the ship's official existence. The name MV Jian Seng appeared in no international shipping registry, no port authority database, no insurance company records. Lloyd's of London, the central clearinghouse for global maritime information, had no record of any vessel bearing that name or matching her physical specifications. It was as if the ship had materialized from nowhere, carrying cargo that no one had loaded bound for destinations that no one had specified. The vessel's construction suggested Chinese or Southeast Asian origin, though specific identification proved impossible without manufacturer's plates or construction records. Her design reflected standard cargo ship architecture from the 1980s or 1990s, indicating she was neither ancient nor cutting-edge technology. The quality of her construction seemed adequate for commercial service, though her current condition suggested years of minimal maintenance or deliberate neglect. Maritime investigators faced unprecedented challenges in determining the ship's history and purpose. Standard investigative procedures relied on documentation trails, crew testimonies, and port records that simply did not exist in the Jian Seng's case. Without registration numbers, previous names, or construction details, authorities could not trace her origins through normal bureaucratic channels that governed legitimate commercial shipping. The rice cargo provided tantalizing but ultimately unhelpful clues about the vessel's recent activities. Analysis revealed high-quality grain consistent with Southeast Asian production, properly stored in conditions that suggested professional handling and transport. The quantity, several thousand tons, represented significant commercial value, making its abandonment economically inexplicable unless the ship's true purpose involved activities more valuable than legitimate cargo transport. Theories about the Jian Seng's purpose ranged from mundane to sinister. Some investigators suggested she had served as a transshipment vessel, transferring cargo between larger ships in international waters to avoid port inspections or customs procedures. Such operations, while not necessarily illegal, might explain the absence of official documentation and the eventual abandonment once her usefulness ended. More disturbing possibilities involved human trafficking or forced labor operations. The ship's size and configuration could have accommodated large numbers of people, while her lack of official identity would have made tracking or regulation impossible. If such activities had been discovered or disrupted, abandoning the vessel might have seemed preferable to risking exposure of larger criminal networks. Drug smuggling provided another explanation for the vessel's mysterious nature. International narcotics organizations sometimes use disposable ships for major trafficking operations, abandoning vessels after successful deliveries rather than risking detection through repeated use. The Jian Seng's size and lack of documentation would have made her ideal for such purposes, though the rice cargo suggested either cover for contraband or a legitimate shipment left behind during hasty evacuation. Some investigators speculated about connections to illegal fishing operations that have plagued Southeast Asian waters for decades. Factory ships supporting illegal fishing fleets often operate without proper documentation, using false identities and abandoned registration to avoid oversight. The Jian Seng might have served as a supply vessel or mothership for such operations before being abandoned when authorities closed in. The complete erasure of the ship's official identity suggested deliberate effort rather than accidental loss of documentation. Removing or destroying all traces of a vessel's history requires systematic planning and resources typically available only to organized criminal enterprises or intelligence operations. The professional thoroughness of this erasure implied sophisticated networks capable of creating and eliminating maritime assets as needed. Environmental concerns about the abandoned vessel prompted decisive action from Australian authorities. The ship's fuel tanks contained enough oil to create significant pollution if breached, while her deteriorating condition posed navigation hazards to other vessels in the region. After exhausting investigative possibilities, officials decided to tow the Jian Seng to deeper waters and scuttle her in a controlled manner. The sinking operation provided final opportunities to search for clues about the vessel's origins and purpose. Divers conducted thorough inspections of cargo holds, crew quarters, and machinery spaces, seeking any evidence that might have survived the systematic erasure of the ship's identity. They found only empty spaces where records should have been, clean surfaces where identifying marks had been removed, and the haunting absence of any trace that humans had ever lived and worked aboard the vessel. Marine pollution experts oversaw the scuttling to ensure environmental compliance, while maritime archaeologists documented the ship's final moments for future reference. The Jian Seng settled into deep water off the Australian coast, carrying her secrets to an ocean floor that would preserve them indefinitely alongside countless other maritime mysteries. The case influenced Australian maritime security procedures, highlighting gaps in international ship tracking systems that allowed vessels to operate without proper oversight. New protocols emerged requiring more rigorous documentation of vessels entering Australian waters, though authorities acknowledged that determined criminal organisations would likely adapt to such measures. International maritime organisations studied the Jian Seng case as an example of how global shipping's complexity could be exploited by those seeking to operate outside legal frameworks. The incident demonstrated the limitations of existing regulatory systems and the need for enhanced cooperation between national authorities in tracking suspicious vessels. Beneath Pacific waters, the vessel's steel bones slowly surrender to salt and time, joining countless other secrets the ocean has claimed over centuries. Her story lingers in maritime security briefings and regulatory reform discussions, a ghost that haunts bureaucrats more than sailors. International shipping databases still contain no record of the MV Jian Seng, as if she never existed at all. Perhaps that was always the point. Some ships are built not just to carry cargo, but to carry secrets, designed from the moment of their construction to vanish without trace when their purpose is fulfilled. The laptop screen still glowed with an unfinished email, its cursor blinking patiently for words that would never be typed. April 18, 2007 brought the kind of discovery that transforms routine maritime patrol into enduring mystery. A surveillance aircraft conducting standard Great Barrier Reef monitoring spotted something that violated every principle of safe sailing. A 32-foot catamaran moving erratically through protected waters with no visible crew aboard, her sails flapping loosely as she drifted wherever wind and current carried her. The vessel bore the name KAZ II across her stern, identifying a yacht that had departed 3 days earlier with 3 experienced sailors who had simply vanished into the Queensland sunshine. The catamaran represented the kind of vessel that epitomised Australian coastal sailing, sturdy enough for serious offshore passages, yet comfortable enough for leisurely coastal cruising. Her twin-hull design provided stability in the variable conditions that characterised Australian waters, while her spacious deck and cabin layout offered the comfort that mature sailors valued during extended voyages. She was the sort of boat that retirement dreams were built around, promising years of exploration along coastlines that offered some of the world's most spectacular sailing. Derek Batten had conceived the voyage as both adventure and reunion, bringing together friendships forged over decades of shared maritime experiences. At 56, he possessed the sailing expertise that came from years navigating Australian waters, while his companions, Peter and James Tunstead, aged 69 and 63 respectively, brought their own wealth of seafaring knowledge to the expedition. These were not novice sailors attempting journeys beyond their capabilities, but experienced mariners who understood ocean conditions and respected the sea's capacity for sudden change. Their planned route from Airlie Beach to Townsville represented familiar coastal sailing, following shipping lanes and island chains that thousands of vessels travelled safely each year. The journey offered spectacular scenery as they would pass close to Great Barrier Reef islands while maintaining safe distances from coral formations that posed navigation hazards. Weather forecasts had indicated favourable conditions, with moderate winds and clear skies that promised comfortable sailing for the 3-day passage. The yacht's departure on April 15th followed standard procedures for coastal voyaging. Batten had filed appropriate voyage plans with maritime authorities, indicating his intended route and estimated arrival times. The catamaran carried proper safety equipment, communication devices and emergency supplies that regulations required for passages beyond protected waters. Nothing in their preparation suggested any awareness of the tragedy that would befall them within 72 hours of departure. Initial progress appeared normal based on automated tracking systems that monitored vessel movements through the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. The KAZ II followed her planned route without deviation, maintaining reasonable speeds that indicated favorable wind conditions and normal sailing operations. Radio communications with shore remained routine, with no reports of mechanical problems, weather concerns, or crew difficulties that might have foreshadowed disaster. The transformation from successful coastal cruise to maritime mystery occurred somewhere between routine position reports and the aircraft sighting that revealed an abandoned vessel drifting aimlessly through reef waters. When rescue teams boarded the catamaran, they encountered a scene frozen in ordinary activity. Lunch preparations interrupted mid-process, personal electronics still functioning, navigation equipment showing normal operations, yet no human presence to explain the continuation of routine shipboard life. The yacht's engine continued running smoothly, automatically maintaining electrical power for lighting, navigation instruments, and communication equipment. Her autopilot system had been disengaged, leaving the vessel to drift according to wind and current patterns that carried her steadily away from her intended course. Most unnervingly, 3 life jackets remained unused in their storage locations, suggesting that whatever had removed the crew from their boat had happened too quickly for emergency procedures to be implemented. Personal belongings told the story of men who had expected to return momentarily to complete whatever tasks they had been performing. Wallets containing identification and credit cards lay exactly where their owners had left them. Passports remained secured in document pouches. Clothing was folded and stored as if the voyage would continue normally. The only signs of disturbance were minor damage to the mainsail and a fishing line trailing behind the yacht, clues that would fuel speculation but provide no definitive answers. Maritime investigators faced the challenge of reconstructing events aboard a vessel that showed no signs of violence, mechanical failure, or weather damage that might explain the sudden disappearance of 3 experienced sailors. The yacht's excellent condition eliminated most theories involving catastrophic incidents that might have forced rapid abandonment. Her communications equipment functioned perfectly, yet no distress calls had been transmitted, suggesting that whatever had happened occurred too quickly for the crew to summon help. Ocean conditions during the relevant period had been moderate, with no reports of unusual weather phenomena that might have surprised experienced sailors. Wind patterns were consistent with seasonal norms, wave heights remained within comfortable ranges for coastal sailing, and visibility had been good throughout the 3-day period. The absence of extreme weather eliminated many scenarios that might otherwise explain sudden crew loss. The fishing line discovery prompted theories about accidental overboard incidents that escalated into multiple casualties. Australian waters contained numerous species of large fish capable of exerting tremendous force on fishing tackle. If one crew member had been fighting a particularly large catch, the fish's sudden surge might have pulled him overboard unexpectedly. His companions' attempts at rescue could have led to a cascade of accidents that left all 3 men in the water while their yacht continued sailing beyond their reach. Medical emergency scenarios focused on the possibility of sudden incapacitation affecting 1 or more crew members. Heart attacks, strokes, or other acute conditions might have created panic situations where remaining crew members made desperate decisions that ultimately proved fatal. If one man had collapsed, his friends might have attempted to assist him in ways that compromised their own safety, particularly if medical emergencies occurred near the yacht's edge, where rescue attempts could result in multiple people falling overboard. Rogue wave theories suggested that freak ocean conditions might have swept the deck clean of human occupants while leaving the yacht structurally intact. Such waves, while rare, could appear without warning even in moderate sea conditions, striking with enough force to remove people from vessels without causing significant structural damage. The damaged sail might have resulted from such an encounter, though the minor nature of the damage argued against waves large enough to sweep away 3 alert sailors. Equipment failure investigations revealed that the yacht's safety systems had been functioning normally at the time of discovery. Emergency beacons remained inactive, life rafts were unused, and communication equipment showed no signs of distress signal attempts. This pattern suggested that whatever had befallen the crew occurred too rapidly for standard emergency procedures to be implemented, or that circumstances prevented the crew from accessing safety equipment. Search and rescue operations covered over 1,600 square nautical miles of ocean, utilizing aircraft, surface vessels, and specialized teams familiar with Great Barrier Reef conditions. Searchers examined beaches, coral formations, and remote islands where survivors might have reached shore or where bodies might have washed up. Despite extensive efforts involving professional rescue teams and volunteer organizations, no trace of the 3 missing men was ever discovered. The Australian Maritime Safety Authority conducted comprehensive investigations that examined every aspect of the yacht's condition, the crew's experience levels, weather patterns, and potential hazards in the area. Their final report acknowledged the impossibility of determining exactly what had happened, while noting that the most likely scenario involved some form of man overboard situation that escalated beyond the crew's ability to manage. Coroner's inquests ultimately ruled the deaths accidental, though families and maritime experts continued debating the specific circumstances that could have led to the simultaneous loss of 3 experienced sailors from a seaworthy yacht in moderate conditions. The case became required study material in sailing safety courses, though instructors struggled to identify specific lessons that might prevent similar tragedies. Maritime folklore absorbed the KAZ II mystery into the broader collection of Australian coastal sailing stories, where it joined other tales of unexplained disappearances and near misses that reminded sailors of the ocean's unpredictable nature. Sailing clubs along the Queensland coast still discuss the case during safety briefings, using it to emphasize the importance of safety harnesses, buddy systems, and emergency procedures even during routine coastal passages. The yacht herself was eventually returned to service under new ownership, though her reputation as an unlucky vessel made crew recruitment challenging. Some sailors refused to board her, believing that certain boats carried curses or attracted misfortune. Others saw her as merely another yacht that had been the scene of tragedy, no different from countless other vessels where accidents had occurred over the decades. 3 families lost fathers, husbands, and friends to circumstances that may never be fully understood. Their grief was compounded by the absence of bodies to bury and the lack of definitive explanations for what had transformed a pleasant sailing vacation into an enduring maritime mystery. Memorial services honored men who had loved the sea, but been claimed by forces that left no witnesses to describe their final moments. Somewhere in the Coral Sea, the truth about those final minutes aboard the KAZ II remains locked beneath waters that have claimed countless vessels and countless lives over the centuries. The yacht's empty decks and unused life jackets serve as reminders that even in familiar waters, even with experienced crews, even under favorable conditions, the ocean retains its power to humble human confidence. Half-finished wine sat in crystal glasses on the yacht's polished table, as if dinner guests had stepped away for just a moment to admire the sunset. August 2006 brought an encounter that challenged assumptions about maritime abandonment and modern wealth. Italian Coast Guard patrols operating near Sardinia's exclusive Punta Volpi coastline spotted something that seemed to belong in Mediterranean luxury magazines rather than emergency response reports. A pristine sailing yacht drifting unmanned through waters frequented by billionaires, celebrities, and European aristocracy seeking privacy in one of the world's most expensive coastal regions. The vessel identified herself as SV Belamica, a name that appeared on no distress lists or missing boat reports. Her sleek lines and immaculate condition suggested recent departure from some prestigious marina, yet she moved aimlessly with wind and current, showing none of the purposeful navigation that characterized vessels in these waters. The sight violated every expectation about how luxury yachts behaved. They were either anchored securely at exclusive moorings or sailed confidently by experienced crews toward carefully planned destinations. Sardinia's coastline attracted wealth that preferred invisibility, drawing owners of super yachts who valued discretion above display. The waters around Punta Volpe regularly hosted vessels worth tens of millions of euros, crewed by professionals who understood that their clients' privacy was worth more than the boats themselves. The appearance of an abandoned luxury yacht in such waters suggested either catastrophic emergency or circumstances that fell outside normal patterns of Mediterranean sailing. Initial boarding revealed a scene that epitomized interrupted affluence. The yacht's interior showcased the kind of craftsmanship that cost more per square foot than most people's homes: hand-finished woodwork, custom upholstery, navigation equipment that represented the latest maritime technology. Personal belongings reflected wealth and sophistication: fine clothing from exclusive boutiques, French charts marked with intended destinations, electronic devices that suggested their owners traveled in circles where privacy and communication security were paramount concerns. The galley contained evidence of recent meal preparation, expensive ingredients partially used, wine bottles opened but not finished, table settings arranged for guests who had never arrived or had departed without cleaning up. Nothing suggested hasty evacuation or emergency abandonment. Instead, the scene conveyed the impression that life aboard had simply paused, with the expectation that normal routines would resume at any moment. Personal documents found aboard revealed ownership by a Luxembourg businessman whose identity authorities initially withheld pending investigation. The yacht's registration was current, her safety certificates up to date, her insurance valid. Nothing in the paperwork suggested financial distress, legal difficulties, or circumstances that might prompt deliberate abandonment. She appeared to be exactly what she seemed: a luxury vessel owned by someone with the resources to maintain her properly. The initial mystery captured international media attention precisely because it seemed to embody every romantic notion about ghost ships while occurring in thoroughly modern circumstances. Here was a vessel that could have appeared in any luxury lifestyle magazine, drifting empty through waters where the super wealthy played, creating an image that blended contemporary excess with ancient maritime fears about ships that sail themselves. Speculation ranged from the dramatic to the mundane. Kidnapping scenarios gained traction given the yacht's obvious value and her owner's presumed wealth. Pirates operating in luxury goods rather than traditional cargo might have targeted such a vessel, though the Mediterranean's heavy patrol presence and sophisticated tracking systems made such theories unlikely. The yacht's pristine condition argued against violent seizure or struggle. More exotic theories involved money laundering operations that had gone wrong, necessitating rapid abandonment before authorities could connect the vessel to illegal activities. The yacht's registration in Luxembourg, a jurisdiction known for financial privacy, and her appearance in Italian waters might have represented asset movement that attracted unwanted attention. However, subsequent investigation revealed no evidence of criminal activity. The mundane truth emerged through patient detective work by Italian maritime authorities. The Luxembourg owner had indeed abandoned his yacht, though not due to pirates, kidnappers, or criminal enterprises. Instead, he had walked away from the vessel following personal financial difficulties and legal complications that made continued ownership problematic. Rather than deal with mounting port fees, maintenance costs, and potential legal liability, he had simply allowed the yacht to drift away from her mooring. Such abandonment, while shocking to those unfamiliar with the yachting world, was not unprecedented. Luxury vessel ownership carried enormous ongoing costs: insurance, maintenance, crew wages, port fees, that could quickly overwhelm owners whose financial circumstances had changed. When faced with expenses they could no longer afford and legal complications they preferred to avoid, some owners chose abandonment over the alternative of formal sale or disposal. The revelation transformed the SV Belamica from maritime mystery into modern morality tale about wealth, responsibility, and the consequences of treating expensive toys as disposable items. Her story reflected broader themes about contemporary affluence, the ease with which the super-wealthy could acquire complex assets, and the equally casual manner in which they might discard them when circumstances changed. Maritime law enforcement agencies used the case to highlight regulatory gaps that allowed such abandonment to occur without immediate consequences for owners. The yacht had drifted for days before discovery, posing potential hazards to other vessels and environmental risks if her fuel tanks had ruptured. The incident prompted discussions about owner responsibility and the need for better tracking of high-value recreational vessels. Environmental groups seized upon the Belamica case as an example of wealthy irresponsibility toward ocean resources. The yacht's fuel, oil, and other potentially polluting substances could have caused significant environmental damage if released into the pristine Mediterranean waters that supported both marine ecosystems and tourism economies. The incident highlighted the need for stricter regulations governing yacht disposal and abandonment. Insurance investigators faced unique challenges in processing claims related to the abandoned vessel. Standard maritime insurance assumed either theft, total loss, or legitimate abandonment due to emergency circumstances. Deliberate abandonment to avoid financial obligations fell into legal grey areas that required careful examination of policy language and owner intent. The yacht herself was eventually recovered and sold through legal proceedings, though her reputation as an abandoned vessel affected her market value. Maritime folklore quickly absorbed the Belamica story, though it lacked the romantic mystery that characterized historical ghost ship tales. Instead, she became a cautionary tale about the costs of luxury and the responsibilities that accompanied wealth. Mediterranean sailing communities incorporated the Belamica case into discussions about yacht ownership ethics and the importance of proper vessel disposal when financial circumstances changed. Sailing magazines published articles examining the legal and practical implications of yacht abandonment, while maritime lawyers used the case as an example of how complex ownership situations could evolve. Luxury yacht brokers reported increased interest in abandoned vessel insurance and legal liability coverage following the Belamica incident. Potential owners began asking more detailed questions about the long-term costs and responsibilities associated with high-end recreational vessels, recognizing that initial purchase price represented only a fraction of total ownership expenses. The story also influenced popular culture representations of modern maritime mysteries. Unlike historical ghost ships that disappeared due to storms, pirates, or supernatural forces, the Belamica represented a distinctly contemporary form of abandonment driven by financial pressure and personal convenience rather than maritime disaster or external threat. She drifts through modern maritime consciousness, not as a vessel claimed by the sea's wrath, but as a symbol of how easily luxury can transform into liability when circumstances change. Her legacy lies not in romantic mystery, but in prosaic reminder that even the most beautiful vessels become ghosts when their owners decide the costs of responsibility exceed the benefits of ownership, leaving behind only the echo of interrupted dinners and the scent of expensive wine left to evaporate in Mediterranean sunshine. The ship's departure whistle echoed across New York Harbor one final time before she sailed into a storm that would erase her from history. March 11th, 1841, marked what should have been another routine Atlantic crossing for one of the era's most ambitious vessels. The SS President steamed away from American shores, carrying 136 souls, and the hopes of an industry that believed steam power had finally conquered the ocean's ancient uncertainties. Instead, she sailed toward a mystery that would haunt maritime engineering for generations, proving that technological confidence was no match for the North Atlantic's winter fury. The President embodied the revolutionary optimism of the 1840s, when steam propulsion promised to liberate ocean travel from wind patterns that had constrained sailing vessels for centuries. At 245 feet long, she represented cutting-edge maritime technology, a hybrid vessel that combined traditional sailing rigs with powerful steam engines capable of maintaining schedules regardless of weather conditions. Her builders at London's prestigious shipyards had crafted what they believed was the future of transatlantic commerce. The British and American Steam Navigation Company had commissioned the President as their flagship, designed to compete directly with emerging steamship lines that were transforming ocean travel from uncertain adventure into predictable transportation. Her passenger accommodations reflected Victorian expectations of luxury, while her cargo holds promised profitable freight services that would subsidize passenger operations. She was intended to prove that steam technology could deliver both comfort and commercial success on the world's most challenging ocean route. Her maiden voyage in 1840 had proceeded successfully enough to establish her reputation among travelers seeking reliable Atlantic crossings. Passengers praised her spacious cabins, elegant dining facilities, and the novel experience of traveling independently of wind conditions. The ship's schedule adherence impressed commercial interests who valued predictable cargo delivery over the uncertainties that had plagued sailing packet services for decades. Yet experienced mariners had noted troubling characteristics during her early service. The President rode lower in the water than conventional vessels, her heavy steam machinery and coal bunkers creating a center of gravity that some observers found concerning. Her response to heavy seas seemed sluggish compared to sailing ships that could rise with waves rather than plowing through them. These technical concerns were often dismissed as conservative resistance to technological progress. Captain Richard Roberts commanded the President during her final departure, bringing decades of experience with both sailing vessels and early steamships to what should have been a routine winter crossing. His passenger manifest included prominent business figures, government officials, and ordinary travelers who had chosen steam power over the uncertain schedules of sailing packets. The cargo holds contained valuable mail, commercial freight, and specie that represented significant financial interests on both sides of the Atlantic. Weather forecasts in 1841 relied on local observation rather than systematic meteorological reporting, leaving captains to interpret conditions based on experience and intuition. Reports from vessels arriving in New York had indicated rough weather in the western Atlantic, though nothing that should have deterred an experienced commander of a modern steamship. The President's steam propulsion offered theoretical advantages over sailing vessels that might be trapped or overwhelmed by adverse conditions. The departure proceeded normally despite deteriorating weather conditions that brought increasing winds and heavy seas to the approaches of New York Harbor. Witnesses described the President steaming confidently into mounting swells, her engines maintaining steady power, while traditional sailing vessels sought shelter or delayed their departures. The sight embodied technological triumph over natural forces, steam machinery imposing human schedules on oceanic conditions that had previously dictated maritime timing. The storm that engulfed the President represented North Atlantic weather at its most destructive, a late winter gale that generated waves capable of overwhelming even large vessels while creating conditions that tested every aspect of ship design and seamanship. Such storms had claimed countless sailing vessels over the centuries, but the President's steam propulsion and modern construction were supposed to provide protection that traditional ships lacked. Initial expectations assumed the President would fight through the storm and arrive in Liverpool slightly behind schedule, as early steamships often did when encountering adverse conditions. When her expected arrival date passed without word, shipping company officials attributed the delay to extended storm damage or mechanical difficulties that might require repairs at sea. Such delays were common enough with experimental technology that immediate alarms seemed unwarranted. As days stretched into weeks without communication, concern escalated among passengers' families and commercial interests awaiting the ship's cargo. The President carried no means of communication beyond signal flags and lights that required visual contact with other vessels, technologies that were useless in mid-ocean emergency situations. Her disappearance occurred during the transition period between traditional maritime communication methods and the telegraph systems that would later revolutionize shipping coordination. Search efforts launched from both American and British ports faced the immensity of the North Atlantic and the primitive navigation technologies available in 1841. Vessels could only search areas they could reach and visually inspect, making comprehensive coverage of possible drift areas virtually impossible. The lack of reliable weather reporting also meant that searchers had no systematic data about storm tracks or areas where the President might have encountered fatal conditions. No trace of the vessel ever surfaced, despite extensive searches by both commercial and naval vessels. The complete absence of wreckage, lifeboats, or human remains suggested either destruction so complete that no debris reached the surface, or sinking in waters so deep that normal floating materials never returned to observable depths. The President's fate remained entirely speculative, based on weather conditions and theoretical analysis rather than physical evidence. Maritime investigators proposed several explanations for the disaster. Structural failure seemed most likely given the experimental nature of early steamship design and the enormous stresses imposed by North Atlantic storm conditions. The President's heavy machinery and low-riding hull might have proven vulnerable to flooding when massive waves overwhelmed her deck or damaged critical structural elements. Mechanical failure offered another possibility, as early steam engines were notoriously unreliable and required constant attention from experienced engineers. Boiler explosions, propeller shaft failures, or steering system breakdowns could have left the vessel helpless in storm conditions where sailing ships might have deployed emergency canvas or jury-rigged steering systems. The President's dependence on complex machinery created vulnerabilities that traditional vessels avoided. The collision theory gained some credence from reports of icebergs in North Atlantic shipping lanes during the relevant period, though no definitive evidence supported this explanation. The President's steel construction might have provided some protection against ice damage, but her experimental design created uncertainties about her ability to survive impacts that wooden ships might absorb through flexible construction. Maritime engineering communities studied the President's loss extensively, using the tragedy to inform design decisions for subsequent steamships. Her disappearance highlighted risks inherent in early steam technology and contributed to more conservative approaches that emphasized proven construction methods over innovative but untested designs. The lessons learned from her fate influenced steamship development for decades. Insurance companies faced unprecedented challenges in processing claims related to the President's loss, as early steamship policies were based on sailing vessel experience and didn't adequately address the unique risks posed by steam propulsion systems. The case established legal precedents for handling total loss claims when no physical evidence of destruction could be produced. Lloyd's of London maintained the President on their missing vessel lists for years, hoping that some trace of her fate might eventually surface. The case influenced maritime insurance practices and contributed to development of more sophisticated risk assessment methods for emerging transportation technologies. Maritime historians preserve the President's story as a reminder of the dangers inherent in technological transition, when confidence in new methods exceeded understanding of their limitations. Her fate illustrates how quickly innovative vessels could vanish when confronted with natural forces that didn't recognize human technological achievements. Beneath North Atlantic waters, the President's remains likely rest among countless other vessels that challenged the ocean's supremacy and lost. Her story endures not as romantic maritime legend, but as sobering reminder that the sea judges all vessels equally, regardless of their technological sophistication or their builders' confidence in human ingenuity over natural power. A lone dog wandered the empty deck, the only witness to whatever had driven an entire crew to abandon their floating home. Sometime in the 1750s, Newport fishermen encountered a sight that would become woven into the fabric of American maritime folklore: a merchant brig drifting toward Rhode Island's rocky coast with no human hand guiding her passage. The vessel appeared seaworthy, her sails properly rigged, her hull intact, yet she moved with the peculiar aimlessness that marked ships without crews. What the fishermen discovered aboard would establish the Seabird as America's first documented ghost ship, creating a mystery that predated the nation itself. The Seabird belonged to the generation of colonial merchant vessels that connected American ports with Caribbean islands and European markets, carrying the goods that built early American commerce. During the mid-18th century, such ships represented both opportunity and risk for colonial entrepreneurs seeking to establish trade networks beyond British imperial restrictions. These vessels typically operated with small crews of experienced sailors familiar with Atlantic coastal navigation and the seasonal patterns that governed profitable commerce. Colonial shipping records from the period were often incomplete, making precise documentation of the Seabird's ownership, cargo, and intended voyage difficult to establish. What emerged from contemporary accounts suggested a vessel engaged in typical merchant trade, possibly carrying rum, molasses, or manufactured goods between colonial ports and Caribbean destinations. Such voyages represented the lifeblood of colonial economy, connecting American producers with broader Atlantic commercial networks. The discovery itself violated every expectation about abandoned vessels. Ships found drifting typically showed signs of the disasters that had claimed their crews: storm damage, pirate attacks, disease, or mechanical failures that forced evacuation. The Seabird presented none of these indicators. Her cargo remained properly secured, suggesting no violent struggle or hasty evacuation. Personal belongings lay exactly where crew members had left them, as if they expected to return momentarily to complete their duties. The survival of a single dog aboard the vessel added an eerie element to the discovery. The animal appeared healthy and well-fed, suggesting either recent abandonment or access to food supplies that had sustained it during whatever period the ship had sailed unmanned. The dog's presence indicated that abandonment had been selective. Whatever had driven the human crew away had not affected the ship's animal passenger. Contemporary theories about the crew's fate reflected the limited understanding of maritime disasters available to colonial investigators. Piracy remained a constant threat along American coasts, with privateers and outright criminals preying on merchant vessels carrying valuable cargoes. However, the Seabird's untouched cargo argued against pirate attack, as raiders typically stripped vessels of anything valuable before abandoning or destroying them. Weather-related explanations focused on sudden storms or dangerous currents that might have convinced the crew their ship was doomed, prompting evacuation in small boats that subsequently foundered in rough seas. The Atlantic coast was notorious for unexpected weather changes that could trap vessels in dangerous conditions, forcing crews to make desperate decisions about whether to remain aboard or attempt escape in lifeboats. More exotic theories emerged from the colonial fascination with supernatural explanations for inexplicable events. Stories of sea monsters, ghostly apparitions, or divine interventions circulated among communities where religious belief and maritime superstition intermingled freely. Some accounts suggested the crew had encountered something so terrifying that abandoning their livelihood seemed preferable to remaining aboard their vessel. Medical explanations considered the possibility of disease outbreaks that had either killed the crew or forced them to quarantine themselves on shore. Colonial ships were vulnerable to various illnesses that could spread rapidly in confined spaces, and crews sometimes abandoned vessels they believed were contaminated. However, the absence of bodies or evidence of illness made such theories difficult to support. The Seabird's subsequent history became as mysterious as her initial abandonment. According to some accounts, the vessel was salvaged and returned to commercial service under the name Beachbird, suggesting that whatever had driven away her original crew was not considered a permanent impediment to her operation. This practical response reflected colonial attitudes toward maritime mysteries. Strange events were less important than useful vessels that could generate profits. Alternative versions of the story claimed the ship was sold at salvage auction to buyers who either ignored or were unaware of the circumstances surrounding her discovery. Colonial maritime law recognized salvage rights for those who recovered abandoned vessels, creating financial incentives that often overcame superstitious concerns about cursed ships or unexplained disappearances. The lack of systematic record-keeping in colonial America meant that the Seabird's ultimate fate became lost in the general confusion of maritime transactions and ship ownership changes that characterized 18th century American commerce. Ships frequently changed names, owners, and registration ports as commercial needs evolved, making long-term tracking of individual vessels virtually impossible. Maritime historians studying colonial American shipping have preserved the Seabird case as one of the earliest documented ghost ship incidents in American waters. The story predates more famous maritime mysteries like the Mary Celeste by over a century, establishing American maritime folklore traditions that would persist throughout the nation's maritime development. Newport's maritime heritage includes the Seabird, among the local legends that connect contemporary Rhode Island with its colonial past. Local historical societies maintain records of the discovery, though the passage of centuries has inevitably mixed fact with folklore in ways that make precise historical reconstruction challenging. The case influenced American maritime superstitions and sailor folklore, contributing to beliefs about cursed vessels and supernatural forces that could affect ships and crews. These cultural elements became part of American maritime identity, distinguishing colonial and early American shipping culture from its European origins. Colonial newspapers occasionally referenced the Seabird mystery in discussions of maritime safety and the dangers faced by merchant vessels operating along the American coast. The story served as a reminder of the ocean's capacity for inexplicable events that challenged rational understanding and practical seamanship. Ecclesiastical authorities in colonial New England sometimes cited the Seabird case in sermons about divine providence and the mysteries of God's will as manifested through natural events. The story fit easily into Puritan theological frameworks that emphasized human helplessness before divine power and the importance of accepting incomprehensible events as expressions of heavenly judgment. Maritime insurance practices in colonial America were influenced by cases like the Seabird, where total crew loss occurred without clear evidence of the disaster's cause. early American insurance companies struggled to develop policies that adequately addressed the unique risks of colonial shipping while remaining profitable for underwriters. The dog's survival became a particularly enduring element of the Seabird legend, symbolizing loyalty and persistence in the face of inexplicable abandonment. Colonial accounts emphasize the animal's condition as evidence that the ship's abandonment had been recent, though they could not explain why a crew would preserve their dog while abandoning their vessel and possessions. 3 centuries later, the Seabird endures in American maritime mythology as proof that the ocean's mysteries began long before the nation's founding. Her story reminds us that some questions have echoed across American waters since colonial times, when settlers first encountered the Atlantic's capacity for transforming routine voyages into legends that no amount of practical experience could explain or prevent.